and I'll make that the hour. So, hello to anybody who's out there, assuming there is anybody out there, I can never tell. My name is SkitterSkreetch, and as always, I am a little rat man who's trapped inside this big and accursed library full of books. I always feel like I should go over it, but for those who don't know, what I do is I read these books. On account of the lamp that you can see there in the top right corner, who makes me do it. Because he's the only source of food down here, and he wants me to. I don't know exactly why. Yeah, today we've got a few stories. We've got the Stolen White Elephant by Mark Twain, which is a new one to us, and I'm probably going to do that last because I find Twain's a bit of a lighter touch than Fitzgerald, and we've got a couple more Fitzgeralds over it. We got Josephine, A Woman with a Past, and The Bridal Party. We're about at the end of the little vein I found of Fitzgerald. There might be one or two more of his down there, but I'm pretty sure we're near the end of it. Yeah, plan is to do these two first, then I'll move on to do what you got? A Twain, which is a bit longer than the other Twains we had, so hopefully it'll do us a little bit longer. Yeah, we'll see how we get on. But as always, if anyone has anything they want me to go over again, if they didn't catch anything, they need me to repeat something, or if they want to make any comments, feel free to hop in and say something. I'll be doing a little bit of commentary after them, or if they're in chapters, I'll be breaking during the chapters to go over it. Without further ado, unless anyone has anything they want me to say or do before we start, I'm going to get on with it. So, let's start with Josephine, A Woman with a Past. Looks like this one is broken down into little sections, so we'll start after them. Chapter 1. Driving slowly through New Haven, two of the young girls become alert. Josephine and Lillian darted soft, frank glances in the strolling groups of 3 or 4 undergraduates. In the larger groups on corners, which throng about, as one man to stare at their receding heads. Believing that they recognised an acquaintance and a solitary loiterer, they waved wildly, whereupon the youth's mouth fell open, and as they turned the next corner, he made a dazed, dilatory gesture with his hand. They laughed. We'll send him a postcard when we get back to school tonight and see if it really was him. Adele Craw, sitting on one of the little seats, kept on talking to Miss Chambers, the chaperone. Glancing sideways at her, Lillian winked at Josephine without batting an eye, but Josephine had gone into a reverie. This was New Haven, a city of her adolescent dreams, a glittering proms where she would move on air among men as intangible as the tunes they danced to. City sacred as Mecca, shining as Paris, hidden as Timbuktu. Twice a year the lifeblood of Chicago, her home, flowed into it, and twice a year flowed back, bringing Christmas or bringing summer. Binga, 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 hasta linga. Love of mine, I pine for one of your glances. The darling boy on the left there, underneath the stars I'll wait. Seeing it for the first time, she found herself surprisingly unmoved. The men they passed seemed young and rather bored with the possibilities of the day, glad of anything to stare at. Seemed undynamic and purposeless against a background of bare elms, lakes of dirty snow, and buildings crowded together under the February sky. A wisp of hope, a word-turned out derby-crowned man hurrying with a stick and suitcase towards the station caught her attention, but his reciprocal glance was too startled, too ingenuous. Josephine wondered at the extent of her own disillusionment. She was exactly 17, and she was blasé. Already she had been a sensation and a scandal. She had driven mature men to a state of disequilibrium. She had, it was said, killed her grandfather, but he was over 80 at the time, perhaps he just died. Here and there in the Middle West were discouraged little spots which, upon inspection, turned out to be the youths who had once looked full into her green and wistful eyes. But a love affair last summer had ruined her faith in all sufficiency of men. She had grown bored with the warning September days. It seemed as though it had happened once too often. Christmas, with its provocative shortness, its travelling glee clubs, had brought no one new. There remained to her only a physical hope in her stomach that there was someone who she would love more than he loved her. They stopped at a sporting goods store. Adele Craw, a pretty girl with clear, honourable eyes and piano legs, purchased the sporting equipment which was the reason for their trip. They were the spring hockey committee for the school. Adele were in addition to the president of the senior class and the school's ideal girl. She had lately seen a change for the better in Josephine Perry, rather as an honest citizen might guilelessly approve a speculator retired on his profits. On the other hand, Adele was simply incomprehensible with Josephine, admirable without doubt, but a member of another species. Yet with the charming adaptability that she had hitherto reserved for men, Josephine was trying hard not to disillusion her, trying to be honestly interested in the small, neat, organised politics of the school. Two men who had stood with their backs to them at another counter turned to leave the store, and they caught sight of Miss Chambers and Adele. Immediately they come forward. The one who spoke to Miss Chambers was thin and rigid of face. Josephine recognised him as Miss Bretton's nephew, a student at New Haven who had just spent several weekends with his aunt at the school. The other man Josephine had never seen before. He was tall and broad, with long curly hair, and an open expression, in which strength of purpose and a nice consideration were pleasantly mingled. It was not the sort of face that generally appealed to Josephine. The eyes were obviously without a secret, with a sideways gamble, without a desperate flicker that showed they had a life of their own apart from the mass speech. The mouth itself was large and masculine. His smile were an act of kindness and control. It were rather with curiosity as to the sort of man who would be attentive to Adele Crawl that Josephine continued to look at him, for his voice, that obviously couldn't lie, greeted Adele as if this meeting were the pleasant surprise of his day. In a moment, Josephine and Lillian were called over and introduced. This is Mr. Waterbury, that was Miss Preston's nephew, and Mr. Dudley Knowlton. Glancing at Adele, Josephine saw on her face an expression of tranquil pride, even of possession. Mr. Knowlton spoke politely, but it was obvious that though he looked at the younger girls, he did not quite see them. And since they were friends of Adele's, he made his suitable remarks, eliciting the fact that they were both coming down to New Haven for their first prom the following week. Who were their hosts? Sophomores. He knew them slightly. Josephine thought they were unnecessarily superior, while they were the charter members of the Loving Brothers Association, Ridgway Saunders and George Davy. On the Glee Club trip, the girls they picked out to rush each year considered themselves a sort of elite, second only to the girls they asked to New Haven. I know I've got some bad news for you, Knowlton said to Adele. You may be leading the prom. Jack Coe went to the infirmary with appendicitis, and against my better judgment, I'm the provisional chairman. He looked apologetic. Being one of those Stone Age dancers, the two-step king, I don't see how I ever got in the committee at all. When the car were on its way back to Miss Gretton's school, Josephine and Lillian bombarded Adele with questions. He's an old friend from Cincinnati, she explained demurely. He's captain of the baseball team and he was the last man for the Skull and Bones. You're going to prom with him? Yes, you see I've known him all my life. Was there a faint implication in the remark that only those who had known Adele all her life knew her at her true worth? Are you engaged? Lillian demanded. Adele laughed. Mercy, I don't think I can think of such matters. It doesn't seem to be time for that sort of thing yet, does it? Yes, interposed Josephine silently. We're just good friends, I think. There can be a perfectly healthy friendship between a man and a girl without a lot of mush, supplied Lillian outfully. Well, yes, but I don't like that word. I was going to say without a lot of sentimental romantic things that ought to come later. Bravo, Adele, said Miss Chambers somewhat perfunctorily. But Josephine's curiosity ran appeased. Doesn't he say he's in love with you and all that sort of thing? Mercy, no. Dad doesn't believe in such stuff any more than I do. He's got enough to do at New Haven, serving on the committees and the team. Ah, said Josephine. She was oddly interested. The two people who were attracted to each other should never even say anything about it, but be content to not believe in such stuff. It was something new in her experience. She had known girls who had no beaux, others who seemed to have no emotions, and still others who lied about what they thought and did. But here were a girl who spoke of the attention of the last man tapped for Skull and Bones as if they were two of the limestone gargoyles that Miss Chambers had pointed out on the completed Artemis Hall. Yet Adele seemed happy, happier than Josephine, who always believed that boys and girls were made for nothing but each other, and as soon as possible. In the light of his popularity and achievements, Knowlton seemed more attractive. Josephine wondered if he would remember her and dance with her at the prom, if that depended on how well he knew her escort, Ridgway Saunders. She tried to remember whether she had smiled at him when he were looking at her. If she had really smiled, she would remember. If she had really smiled, he would remember her and dance with her. She was still trying to be sure of that over her 2 French irregular verbs in the 10 stanzas of the Ancient Mariner that night, but she was still uncertain when she fell asleep. That's the end of chapter 2. Or chapter 1, I should say. Start of chapter 2. I mean, I can't say that there seems to be too much to it. We see a pretty standard sort of Fitzgerald introduction to our society. Girl meets boy. I suppose it's interesting that the fascination here seems to be the absence of romance, which is a how'd you put it? A sort of counterpoint to the apparently wild romantic adventures of this 17-year-old girl has had up to this point, which seems a bit much to me, but what do I know? I'm a rep. But yeah, I mean, the amount of details taken in describing the fella who was caught her fancy, this Skull and Bones bloke, seems like he's probably going to be a recurring figure, so I expect he'll be important. Let me have a little drink of water here. Wipe my throat and then we'll carry on. Right. So press it on then. Chapter 2. Three gay young sophomores, the founders of the Love and Brothers Association, took an house together for Josephine, Lillian and a girl from Farrington and their three mothers. For the girls, it was their first prom, and they arrived at New Haven with all the nervousness of the condemned. But a Sheffield fraternity tea in the afternoon yielded up such a plethora of boys from home, and boys who had visited there and friends of those boys, and new boys, well-known possibilities but obvious eagerness. They were glowing with self-confidence as they poured into the glittering crowd that thronged the armoury at 10. It was impressive. For the first time, Josephine went at a function run by men upon men's standards, an outward projection of the New Haven world from which women were excluded, which went on mysteriously behind the scenes. She perceived that their three escorts, who had once seen the very embodiments of worldliness, were modest fry in this relentless microcosm of accomplishment and success. A man's world. Looking around her at the Glee Club concert, Josephine then felt a grudging admiration for the good fellowship, the good feeling. She envied Adele Craw, barely glimpsed in the dressing room, for the position she automatically occupied by being Dudley Knowlton's girl that night. She envied her more, stepping off under the draped bunting through a gateway of hydrangeas at the end of the Grand March, very demure and faintly unpowdered in a plain white dress. She was temporarily the centre of all attention, and at the sight of something that had long lain dormant in Josephine awakened a sense of a problem, a scarcely defined possibility. "Josephine," Ridgway Saunders began, "you can't realise how happy I am that it's come true. I've looked forward to this so long, and I dreamed about it." She smiled up at him automatically, but her mum were elsewhere, and as the dance progressed, the idea continued to obsess her. She was rushed from the beginning. To the men from the tea were added a dozen new faces, a dozen confident or timid voices, until, like all the more popular girls, she had her own queue trailing about the room. All this had happened to her before, and they were something missing. One might have 10 men to Adele's 2, but Josephine were abruptly aware that here a girl took on the importance of the man who had brought her. She was discomforted by the unfairness of it all. A girl earned her popularity by being beautiful and charming. The more beautiful and charming she was, the more she could afford to disregard public opinion. It seemed absurd that simply because Adele had managed to attach a baseball captain, who mightn't know anything about girls at all, or be able to judge their attractions, she should just be elevated in spite of her thick ankles, her rather too pinkish face. Josephine was dancing with Ed Benman from Chicago. He was her earliest beau, of flaming pigtail days at dancing school, when one wore white cotton stockings, lace drawers with a waist attached, and ruffled dresses with the inevitable sash. "What's the matter with me?" she asked Ed, thinking aloud. "For months I felt as if I were 100 years old, and I'm just 17, and that party was only 7 years ago." "You've been in love a lot since then," Ed said. "I haven't," she protested indignantly. "I've had a lot of silly stories started about me, without any foundation, usually by girls who are jealous." "Jealous of what?" "Don't get fresh," she said tartly. "Dance me near Lillian." Dudley Knowlton had just cut in on Lillian. Josephine spoke to her friend, then waiting until their turns would bring them face to face over a space of seconds, she smiled at Knowlton. This time she made sure that the smile intersected as well as met glance. He passed beside the circumference of her fragrant charm. If this had been named like French perfume of a later day, it might have been called Please. He bowed and smiled back. A minute later he cut in on her. They were in an eddy in a corner of the room, and she danced slower so that he objected himself, and for a moment they went around in a slow circle. "You looked so sweet leading the march with Adele," she told him. "You looked so sweet leading the march with Adele," she told him. "You seemed so serious and kind, as if the others were a lot of children. Adele looked sweet too." And she added on inspiration, "At school I've taken her for a model." "You have?" She saw him conceal a sharp surprise. He said, "I'll have to tell her that." He were handsomer than she had thought, and behind his cordial good manners there was a sort of authority. They were correctly attentive to her. She saw his eyes search the room quickly to see if all went well. He spoke quietly in passing to the orchestra leader, who came down deferentially at the edge of his dais. Last man for Bones. Josephine knew what that meant. Her father had been Bones. Ridgway Saunders and the rest of the Love and Brothers Association would certainly not be Bones. She wondered, if there had been a Bones for girls, whether she would be tapped, or Adele Crawl with her ankles, symbol of solidity. "Come on over here, want to have you near, get a welcome hearty, come and join the party." "I wonder how many boys have taken you for a model." she asked. If I were a boy, he'd be exactly what I'd like to be. Except I'd be terribly bothered having girls falling in love with me all the time. They don't, he said simply. They never have. Oh yes, but they hide it because they're so impressed with you, and they're afraid of Adele. Adele wouldn't object, he added hastily, if it ever happened. Adele doesn't believe in being serious about such things. Are you engaged to her? He stiffened a little. I don't believe in being engaged till the right time comes. Neither do I, agreed Josephine readily. I'd rather have one good friend than 100 people hanging around being mushy all the time. Is that what the crowd that keeps following her around tonight? What crowd? She asked innocently. The 50% of sophomore class that's rushing you. A lot of parlour snakes, she said ungratefully. Josephine were radiantly happy now as she turned beautifully through the newly enchanted hall in the arms of the chairman of the prom committee. Even this extra time with him she owed to the awe with which she inspired in her entourage. That man cut in eventually, and they were a sharp fall in her relation. The man were impressed that Dudley Norton had danced with her. He were more respectful, and his modulated admiration bored her. In a little while she hoped Dudley Norton would cut back, but as midnight passed, dragging on another hour with it, she wondered if after all it had only been a courtesy to a girl from Adele's school. Since then Adele had probably painted him a neat little landscape of Josephine's past. When finally he approached her, she grew tense and watchful, a state which made her exteriorly pliant and tender and quiet. But instead of dancing, he drew her into the edge across a row of boxes. Adele has had an accident at the cloakroom steps. She turned her ankle a little and tore her stocking on a nail. She'd like to borrow a pair from you because you're staying near here and we're away out of the lawn club. Of course. I'll run over with you. I have a car outside. But you're busy. You mustn't bother. Of course I'll go with you. There a thaw in the air, and then a thin and lucid spring hovered delicately around the elms and cornices of buildings, whose bareness and coldness had so depressed her the week before. The night had a quality of asceticism, as if the essence of the masculine struggle was seeping everywhere through the little city where men of 3 centuries had brought their energies and aspirations for winnowing. And Dudley Norton, sitting beside her, dynamic and capable, was symbolic of all of it. It seemed that she had never met a man before. Come in, please, she said as he went up the steps of the house with her. They've made it very comfortable. There was an open fire burning in the dark parlour. When she come downstairs with the stockings, she went in and stood beside him, very still for a moment, watching it with him. Then she looked up, silent, looked down, looked at him again. Did you get the stockings? He asked, moving a little. Yes, she said breathlessly. Kiss me for being so quick. He laughed as if she'd said something witty and moved towards the door. She was smiling, and her disappointment was deeply hidden as they got into the car. It's been wonderful meeting you, she told him. I can't tell you how many ideas I've gotten from what you said. They haven't any ideas. You have? All that about not getting engaged till the proper time comes? I haven't had much opportunity to talk to a man like you. Otherwise my ideas would be different, I guess. I've just realised that I've been wrong about a lot of things. I used to want to be exciting. Now I want to help people. Yes, he agreed. That's very nice. He seemed about to say more when they arrived at the armoury. In their absence, supper had begun, and crossing the floor by his side, conscious of many eyes regarding them, Josephine wondered if people thought they had been up to something. We're late, said Norton when Adele went off to put on the stockings. The man you're with has probably given you up long ago. You'd better let me get you something here. That would be too divine. Afterwards, back on the floor again, she moved in a sweet aura of abstraction. The followers of several department bells merged with hers, until now no girl on the floor cut in with such frequency. Even Miss Berrington's nephew, Ernest Waterbury, danced with her in stiff approval. Danced? With a tentative change of pace, she simply swung from man to man in a sort of hands right and left around the floor. She felt a sudden need to relax, and as if in answer to her mood, a new man was presented. A tall, sleek southerner with a persuasive note. You lovely creature, I've been straining my eyes watching your camouflage fluttering around. You stand out above all these others like an empty beauty rose over a lot of field daisies. Dancing with him a second time, Josephine hearkened to his pleading. All right, let's go outside. You want outdoors, I was considering, he explained as they left the floor. I have a mortgage on the nook right here in the building. All right. Buck Shaffy of Alabama led the way through the cloakroom, through a passage to an inconspicuous door. It's the private apartment of my friend Sergeant Boone, instructor of the battery. You want to be particularly sure it would be used as a nook tonight, and not a reading room or anything like that. Opening the door, he turned on a dim light. She came in and shut it behind her, and they faced each other. Mighty sweet, he murmured. His tall face come down, his long arms wrapped around her tenderly, and very slowly, since their eyes met for quite a long time, he drew up to him, Josephine kept thinking that she had never kissed a southern boy before. They started apart at the sudden sound of a key turning the lock outside. There were a muffled snicker, followed by retreating footsteps, and Book sprang towards the door and wrenched at the handle, just as Josephine noticed that they were not only Sergeant Boone's parlour, it was his bedroom as well. Who was it? She demanded. Why'd they lock us in? Some funny boy. I like to get my hands on him. Will he come back? Book sat down on the bed to think. I couldn't say. Don't even know who it was. If somebody on the committee came along, it wouldn't look too good, would it? Seeing her expression change, he come over and put his arm round her. Don't you worry, honey, we'll fix it. She returned his kiss briefly, but without distraction. Then she broke away and went to the next apartment, which rung with boots, uniform coats, and various military equipment. There's a window up here, she said. It was high in the wall and had not been opened for a long time. Book mounted on a chair and forced it ajar. About 10 feet down, he reported after a moment. There's a big pile of snow just underneath it. You might get a nasty fall and you'll sure set your shoes and stockings. You've got to get out, Josephine said sharply. You better wait and give this funny man a chance. I won't wait. I want to get out. Look, throw out the blankets from the bed and I'll jump on that. Will you jump first and spread them over the pile of snow? After that, it was merely exciting. Carefully, Brooke shakily wiped the dust from the window to protect her dress. Then they were struck silent by a footstep that approached and passed the outer door. Brooke jumped and she heard him kick him profanely as he waded out the soft drift below. He spread the blankets. At the moment when Josephine swung her legs out the windows, there were a sound of voices outside the door, and the key turned again in the lock. She landed softly, reaching for his hand, and convulsed with laughter. They ran and skidded down the half block towards the corner. And reaching the entrance of the armoury, they stood panting for a moment, breathing in the fresh night. Book were reluctant to go inside. Why don't you let me conduct you where you stay? We can sit around and sort and recuperate. She hesitated, drawn towards him by the community of their late predicament. And something were calling her inside, as if fulfilment of her relation waited her there. No, she decided. As they went in, she collided with a man in a great hurry, and looked up to recognise Dudley Norton. So sorry, he said. Oh, hello. Will you dance me over to my box? She begged him, impulsively. I've torn my dress. As they started off, he said abstractly, The fact is, a little mischief have come up, and the buck have been passed to me. I was going along to see about it. Her heart raced wildly, and she felt the need of being another sort of person immediately. I can't tell you how much it meant meeting you. It'd be wonderful to have one friend I could be serious with without being all mushy and sentimental. Would you mind if I wrote you a letter? Would Adele mind? Lord, no. The smile had become utterly unfathomable to her. As they reached the box, she thought of one more thing. Is it true that the baseball team is training at Hot Springs during Easter? Yes. You going there? Yes. Good night, Mr. Norton. But she was destined to see him once more. They were outside the men's coat room, and she waited among a crowd of other pale survivors and their paler mothers, whose wrinkles had doubled and tripled with the passing night. He was explaining something to Adele, and Josephine heard the phrase, The door was locked and the window open. Suddenly it occurred to Josephine that, meeting her coming in damp and breathless, he must have guessed at the truth, and Adele would doubtless confirm his suspicions. Once again the spectre of her old enemy, the plain and jealous girl, arose before her. Shutting her mouth tight together, she turned away. They had seen her. Adele called to her in a cheerful, ringing voice. Come say good night. You were so sweet about the stocking. Here's a girl you won't find doing shoddy, silly things, Dudley. Impulsively, she leaned and kissed Josephine on the cheek. You'll see I'm right, Dudley. Next year she'll be the most respected girl in school. That's the end of chapter 2. That is interesting. We do see a bit of character development here that I think is... I don't know. I'm curious about it. When it was said that she was 17, I thought the title Woman with a Past were a bit of a misnomer or perhaps a joke. But she does seem to have one. She's developing as a person very quickly, but she's also in a stage where she has found that she does not like the person she's been and wants to change, but is also trapped in old habits. It's a remarkably sort of complex and mature position to hold for a person who is that age, and I sort of suspect that it's been put on her mostly to be able to take advantage of the setting rather than because it's a real characterisation given to a 17-year-old. It's interesting. I must admit, I'm also not too familiar with the social habits of the sort of 1920s and the sort of events that run on, so I'm not entirely clear as to what the significance of this prom is versus your average one, but yeah, it's interesting. The phrase skull and bones as well, I know that phrase. I've heard of the skull and bone society, but I can't for the life of me think of what it relates to. Just one of them things. Still, let's have a quick drink of water, and then we'll press on with chapter 3. Always nice when the water is normal. So seldom is. Right. Chapter 3. As things go in the interminable days of early March, what happened next happened quickly. The annual senior dance at Miss Barretton's school came on a night soaked through with spring, and all the junior girls lay awake listening to the sighing tunes from the gymnasium. Between the numbers, when boys up from New Haven and Princeton wandered about the grounds, cloistered glances looked down from dark open windows upon the vague figures. Not Josephine, though. Not Josephine, as she lay wide awake like the others. Such vicarious diversions had no place in the sober pattern she was spinning now from day to day, and she might as well have been in the foremost of those who called down to the men and threw notes and entered into conversations, where destiny had suddenly turned against her and was spinning a dark web of its own. Little lady, don't be depressed and blue. After all, we're in the same canoe. Dorothy and Alton were over in the gymnasium 50 yards away. The proximity to a man did not thrill her as it would have done a year ago, not at least in the same way. Laughs she saw now were a serious matter, and in the modest darkness a line of a novel ceaselessly recurred to her. He is a man fit to be the father of my children. What were the seductive graces, the fast lines of 100 parlour snakes compared to such realities? One couldn't go on forever kissing comparative strangers behind half-closed doors. Under her pillow now were 2 letters, answers to her letters. They spoke in a bold, round hand at the beginning of baseball practice. They were glad Josephine felt as she did about things, and the writer certainly looked forward to seeing her at Easter. Of all the letters she had ever received, they were the most difficult from which to squeeze a single drop of heart's blood. One couldn't even read the yours or the subscription of as your, but Josephine knew them by heart. They were precious because he had taken the time to write them. They were eloquent in the very postage stamp because he used so few. She was restless in her bed. The music had begun again in the gymnasium. Oh my love, I've waited so long for you. Oh my love, I'm singing this song for you. Oh. From the next room there were light laughter, and then from below a male voice, and a long interchange of comic whispers. Josephine recognised Lillian's laugh and the voices of 2 other girls. She could imagine them as they lay across the window in their nightgowns, their heads just showing from the open window. Come right down, one boy kept saying. Don't be formal, come just as you are. There was a sudden silence, and a quick crunching of footsteps on gravel, a suppressed snicker and a scurry, and the sharp protesting groan of several beds in the next room, and banging of a door down the hall. Trouble for somebody, maybe. A few minutes later, Josephine's door half opened, and she caught a glimpse of Miss Twain against the dim corridor light, and then the door closed. The next afternoon, Josephine and 4 other girls, all of whom denied having breathed so much as a word into the night, were placed on probation. There was absolutely nothing to do about it. Miss Quain had recognised their faces in the window, and they were all from the 2 rooms. It were an injustice, but it were nothing compared to what happened next. 1 week before Easter vacation, the school motored off on a 1-day trip to inspect a milk farm, all save the ones on probation. Miss Chambers, who sympathised with Josephine's misfortune, enlisted her services in entertaining Mr. Ernest Waterbury, who was spending a weekend with his aunt. This were only vaguely better than nothing, for Mr. Waterbury were a very dull, very priggish young man. He was so dull and so priggish that the following morning Josephine was expelled from school. It happened like this. They had strolled in the grounds, they had sat down at a garden table and had tea. Ernest Waterbury had expressed a desire to see something in the chapel, just a few minutes before his aunt's car rolled up the drive. The chapel were reached by descending winding mock-medieval stairs, and her shoes, still wet from the garden, Josephine had slipped on the top step and fallen 5 feet directly into Mr. Waterbury's unwilling arms, where she lay helpless, convulsed with irresistible laughter. It were in this position that Miss Barretton and the visiting trustees had found them. But I had nothing to do with it, declared the ungallant Mr. Waterbury. Flustered and outraged, he was packed up back to New Haven, and Miss Barretton, connecting this with last week's sin, proceeded to lose her head. Josephine, humiliated and furious, lost hers, and Mr. Perry, who happened to be in New York, arrived at the school the same night. As passionate indignation, Miss Barretton collapsed and retraced, but the damage was done, and Josephine packed her trunk. Unexpectedly, monstrously, just as it had begun to mean something, the school life were over. For the moment, all her feelings were directed against Miss Barretton. and the only tears she said at leaving were out of anger and resentment. Riding with her father up to New York, she saw that while at first he had instinctively and wholeheartedly taken her part, he also felt a certain annoyance with her misfortune. "We'll all survive," he said. "Unfortunately, even that old idiot, Miss Barrington, will survive. She'll be running a reform school." He brooded a moment. "Anyhow, your mother arrives tomorrow, and you and she go down to Hot Springs as you planned." "Hot Springs?" Josephine cried in a choke voice. "Oh, no." "Why not?" he demanded in surprise. "It seems the best thing to do. Give it a chance to blow over before you go back to Chicago." "I'd rather go to Chicago," said Josephine breathlessly. "Daddy, I'd much rather go to Chicago." "That's absurd. Your mother started east, and the arrangements are all made. At Hot Springs you can go out and ride and play golf, and forget that old she-devil. Isn't there another place in the east we could go? There's people I know going to Hot Springs who know all about this. People I don't want to meet. Girls from school." "Now, Joe, keep your chin up. This is one of those times. Sorry I said about letting it blow over in Chicago. If we hadn't made other plans, we'd go back and face every old shrew and gossip in town right away. When anybody shrinks off in a corner, they think you've been up to something bad. If anybody says anything to you, you tell them the truth. What I said to Miss Barrington. You tell them she said you could come back, and I damn well wouldn't let you go back. They won't believe it." There would be, at all events, 4 days of respite at Hot Springs before the vacations of the schools. Josephine passed this time taking golf lessons from a professional so newly arrived from Scotland that he surely knew nothing of her misadventure. She even went riding with a young man one afternoon, feeling almost at home with him after his admission that he had flunked out of Princeton in February, a confidence, however, which she did not reciprocate in kind. But in the evening, despite the young man's importunity, she stayed with her mother, feeling nearer to her than she had ever felt before. But one afternoon in the lobby, Josephine saw by the desk 24 good-looking young men, waiting by a stack of back cases and bags, and knew that what she had dreaded was her hand. She ran upstairs and with an invented headache dimmed down there that night. But after dinner she walked restlessly around their apartment. She was ashamed not only of her situation, but of her reaction to it. She had never felt any pity for the unpopular girls who skulked in dressing rooms because they could attract no partners on the floor, or for girls who were outsiders at Lake Forest. And now she was like them, hard and miserably out of life. Alarmed lest already the change were written in her face, she paused in front of a mirror, fascinated as ever by what she found there. "The darn fool," she said aloud, and as she said it her chin went up and the faint cloud about her eyes lifted. The phrases of the myriad love letters she had received passed before her eyes. Behind her, after all, were the reassurance of 100 lost and pleading faces, of innumerable tender and pleading voices. Her pride flooded back into her, till she could see the warm blood rushing up to her cheeks. There was a knock at the door. It was the Princeton boy. "How about slipping downstairs?" he proposed. "There's a dance. It's full of Ealies, the whole Yale baseball team. I'll pick up one of them and introduce you, and you'll have a big time. How about it?" "All right, but I don't want to meet anybody. You'll just have to dance with me all evening." "You know that suits me." She hurried into her new spring evening dress of the frailest fairy beauty, blue, and the excitement of seeing herself in it seemed she had shed the old skin of winter and emerged a shining chrysalis, with no stain. Going downstairs, her feet fell softly, just off the beat of the music from below. It was a tune from a play she had seen a week ago in New York, a tune with a future, ready for gaieties as yet unthought, a love as yet not yet met. Dancing off, she was certain that life had innumerable beginnings. She had hardly gone 10 steps when she was cut in upon by Dudley Knowlton. "Why, Josephine!" He had never used the first name before. He stood holding her hand. "Why, I'm so glad to see you. I've been hoping and hoping you'd be here." She soared skyward on a rocket of surprise and delight. "You're actually glad to see her?" The expression on his face was obviously sincere. Could it be possible he hadn't heard? "Adele wrote me you might be here. She wasn't sure." Then he knew and didn't care. He liked her anyhow. "I'm in sackcloth and ashes," she said. "Well, they're very becoming to you." "You know what happened?" she ventured. "I do. I wasn't going to say anything. It's generally agreed that Waterbury behaved like a fool. And it's not going to be much help to him in the elections next month. Look, I want you to dance with some men who are just starving for a touch of beauty." Presently she was dancing with, it seemed, to her, the entire team at once. Intermittently Dudley Knowlton cut back in, as well as the Princeton man, who was somewhat indignant at the unexpected competition. There were many girls from many schools in the room. With an admirable team spirit, the Yale men displayed a sharp prejudice in Josephine's favour. Already she was pointed out from the chairs along the wall. But interiorly she was waiting for what would come in, for the moment when she would walk with Dudley Knowlton into the warm southern night. It come naturally, just at the end of a number, and they strolled along an avenue of early blooming lilacs and turned a corner and another corner. "You were glad to see me, weren't you?" Josephine said. "Of course." I was afraid at first. I was sorriest about what happened at school because of you. I've been trying so hard to be different. Because of you. You mustn't think of that school business anymore. Everybody that matters knows you've got a bad deal. Forget it and start over. Yes, she agreed tranquilly. She were happy. The breeze and the scent of lilacs. That was she, lovely and intangible. The rustic benches where they sat and the trees. That was he, rugged and strong beside her, protecting her. I thought so much of meeting you here, she said after a minute. You've been so good to me that I thought maybe in a different way I could be good for you. I mean, I know ways of having a good time that you don't know. For instance, we've certainly got to go horseback riding by moonlight some night. That'll be fun. He didn't answer. I can really be very nice when I like something. That's really not often, she interpolated hastily. Not seriously, but I mean when I do feel seriously about a boy, and I are really friends. I don't believe in having a whole mob of other boys hanging around, taking up time. I like to be with them all the time, all day and all evening, don't you? He stirred a little on the bench, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, looking at his strong hands. A gently modulated voice sank a note lower. When I like anyone, I don't even like dancing. It's weird to be alone. Silence for a moment. Well, you know, he hesitated a frown. As a matter of fact, I'm mixed up in a lot of engagements made some time ago with some people. He flamed about unhappily. In fact, I won't even be at the hotel after tomorrow. I'll be out at the house of some people down in the valley, a sort of house party. As a matter of fact, Adele's getting here tomorrow. Absorbed in her own thoughts, she hardly heard him at first. At the name, she caught her breath sharply. We're both to be at this house party while we're here, and I imagine it's more or less arranged what we're going to do. Of course, in the daytime, I'll be here for baseball practice. I see. Her lips were quivering. You'll be with Adele. I think that more or less I will. She'll want to see you, of course. Another silence, while he twisted his big fingers, and she helplessly imitated the gesture. You were just sorry for me, she said. You like Adele much better. Adele and I understand each other. She's been more or less my ideal since we were children together. And I'm not your kind of girl. Josephine's voice trembled with a sort of fright. I suppose because I've kissed a lot of boys and got a reputation for speed and raised abuse. It isn't that. Yes, it is, she declared passionately. I'm just paying for things. She stood up. You'd better take me back inside so I can dance with the kind of boy that likes me. She walked quickly down the path, tears of misery streaming from her eyes. He overtook her by the steps, but she only shook her head and said, Excuse me for being so fresh. I'll grow up. I got what was coming to me. It's all right. A little later, when she looked around the floor for him, he had gone, and Josephine realised with a shock that for the first time in her life, she had tried for a man and failed. But saving the very young, only love begets but love, and from the moment Josephine had perceived that his interest in her were merely kindness, she realised the women were not in her heart, but in her pride. She would forget him quickly, but she would never forget what she had learned from him. There were two kinds of men, those you play with and those you might marry. And as this passed through her mind, her restless eye wandered casually over the group of stags, resting very lightly on Mr. Gordon Tinsley, a current catch of Chicago, reputedly the richest young man in the Middle West. He never paid any attention to young Josephine till tonight. 10 minutes ago he had asked her to go driving with him tomorrow. But he did not attract her, and she decided to refuse. One mustn't run through people, and, for the sake of a romantic hour, trade a possibility that might develop, quite seriously, later at a proper time. She did not know that this was the first mature thought that she had ever had in her life, but it was. The orchestra were packing their instruments, and the Princeton man was still at her ear, still imploring her to walk out with him into the night. Josephine knew without cogitation which sort of man he was, and the moon was bright even on the window, so with a certain sense of relaxation she took his arm, and they strolled out to the pleasant bower she had so lately quitted, and their faces turned to each other like little moons under the grey white ones, which hovered high over the Blue Ridge. His arm dropped softly about her yielding shoulder. Well, he whispered. Well. And that's the end of the piece. That is interesting. That's quite an interesting little. I'm trying to think how. I'm gonna have a quick drink here while I think that over because I'm struggling to put some things in the words. One of the things F. Scott Fitzgerald is known mostly for writing about is the roaring 1920s. The old sort of high society and lights and parties and all that. And I think that might be one of the best stories I've ever read explaining the nature of social movement in that time period for women of that class. That final realisation, the division between a man you might marry and a man you might not. Because Josephine's, she's not doing anything untoward really, especially not by modern standards. She's running about a bit and she's hanging out with men, but she's not doing anything excessive. She's just having she's being a child, being a young adult, having a time. But in her mind, she's now clearly drawn a distinction between men who are just gadabouts, a bit of a fancy something to hang around with, and men who she might marry. Men of a significant enough social import, and maybe character, but maybe not even character. She doesn't talk about the character of the last fella she considers, just that he's rich. She draws a dividing line between people. And it's described as the first mature thought she ever has. Which is heartbreaking in a couple of ways, really. I think first it's heartbreaking in that is the way she needs to develop, that is the correct attitude to hold. But also in that it is so fundamental to her understanding, right? It changes who she is as a person. It's vital to her development. Understanding what kind of man is so important that you cannot afford to get about with him, you cannot afford to be friendly with him, or to have a light affair with him, but you have to be serious to let things develop, means that you have to stratify your whole social life around those distinctions, and yet also you have to stratify every person in that life as well. An inherent divide into the have-nots and haves, and fundamental to the higher society. Lord Almighty, but that is quite a downer. And on the face of it, this is quite a light-hearted Fitzgerald. There's no death or family tragedy or anything. It's just a couple of minor events and a bit of bad fortune and a slight snubbing. But once again, every Fitzgerald story finds some way to be terribly heartbreaking. I don't know how he does it. But yeah, I think that's about the long and short of it. I could go into some more detail about the nature of romance, but I am a rat and not super well versed in the intimacies or intricacies of human romance, or those specific customs of the 1920s. So rather than beating about the bush, how about we press on to the bridal party? This one is a smidge shorter than Josephine, so it probably won't take us quite as long. But we'll take our time with it. It also looks like it is divided into chapters, so we'll do the same thing. And we'll go chapter by chapter, breaking it down. Yeah. Without further ado, the bridal party, chapter 1. There were the usual insincere little notes saying, "I wanted you to be the first to know." It were a double shot to Michael, announcing as it did both the engagement and the imminent marriage, which, moreover, was to be held not in New York, decently and far away, but here in Paris, under his very nose, if that could only be said to extend over the Protestant Episcopal Church of the Holy Trinity, Avenue Georges Sac. The date were 2 weeks off, early in June. At first, Mike were afraid his stomach felt hollow. When he left the hotel that morning, the femme de chambre, who were in love with his fine, sharp profile and his pleasant buoyancy, sent the hard abstraction that had settled over him. He walked in a daze to his bank. He bought a detective story at Smith's on the Rue de Rivière. He sympathetically stared for a while at a faded panorama in the battlefields in a tourist office window, and cursed the Greek tout who followed him with an half-displayed packet of innocuous postcards, wanting to be very, very dirty indeed. But the fear stayed with him, and after a while he recognised it as the fear that now he would never be happy. He had met Caroline Dandy when she was 17, possessed her young heart all through the first season in New York, and then lost her, slowly, tragically, uselessly, because he had no money and could make no money, because with all the energy and goodwill in the world he could not find himself. He was loving him still. Caroline had lost faith and begun to see him as something pathetic, futile and shabby, outside the great shining stream of life towards which he were inevitably drawn. Since his only support was that she loved him, he learned He leaned weakly on that. The support broke, but still he held onto it, and were carried out to sea and washed up on the French coast, with its broken pieces still in his hands. He carried them round with him in the form of photographs and packets of correspondences, and a liking for maudlin popular song called Among My Souvenirs. He kept clear of other girls, as if Caroline would somehow know it and reciprocate with a faithful heart. I note informed him that he had lost her forever. It were a fine morning. In front of the shops in the Rue de Castiglione, proprietors and patrons were on the sidewalk, gazing upward. For the Graf Zeppelin, shining and glorious, symbol of escape and destruction, of escape if necessary through destruction, glided in the Paris sky. He heard a woman say, in French, that it would not astonish her if that commenced to let fall the bombs. Then she heard another voice, then he heard another voice, full of husky laughter, and the void in his stomach froze. Jerking about, you were face to face with Caroline Dandy and her fiancé. Why, Michael, we were wondering where you were. I asked the Guaranteed Trust and Morgan and Company. Finally sent them out to an international city. Why didn't they back away? Why didn't they back right up, walking backwards down the Rue de Castiglione, along the Rue de Rivioli, through the Tuileries Garden, still walking backwards as fast as they could till they grew vague and faded out across the river? This is Hamilton Rutherford, my fiancé. We've met before. At Pat's, wasn't it? And last spring at the Ritz Bar. Michael, where have you been keeping yourself? Around here. This agony. Previews of Hamilton Rutherford flashed before his eyes. A quick series of pictures. Sentences. He remembered hearing that he had brought a seat in 1920 for $125,000 of borrowed money. And just before the break sold it for more than $500,000. Not handsome like Michael, but vitally attractive, confident, authoritative. Just the right height over Carolyn there. Michael had always been too short for Carolyn when they danced. Rutherford was saying, No, I'd like it very much if you'd come to the bachelor dinner. I'm taking the Ritz Bar from 9 o'clock on. Then right after the wedding there'll be a reception and breakfast at the Hotel Josephine. And Michael, George Paxton is giving a party day after tomorrow at Chez Victor, and I want you to be sure and come, and also to tea on Friday at Jebley's West. She'd want to have you if she knew where you were there. She'd want to have you if she knew where you were. Where's your hotel so we can send you an invitation? You see, the reason we decided to have it over here is because Mother has been sick in a nursing home here, and the whole clan is in Paris, and Hamilton's mother being here too. The entire clan. They had always hated him, except her mother, always discouraged his courtship. What little counter he was in the game of families and money. Under his hat his brow sweated with the humiliation of that fact, that for all his misery, he was worth just exactly so many invitations. Frantically he began to mumble something about going away. Then it happened. Caroline saw deep into him, and Michael knew that she saw. She saw through to his profound woundedness, and something quivered inside him, or inside her, died out along the curve of her mouth, and in his eyes, and in her eyes. He had moved her. All the unforgettable impulses of first love had surged up once more. Their hearts had in some way touched across 2 feet of Paris sunlight. She took her fiancé's arm suddenly, as if to steady herself with the feel of it. They parted. Michael walked quickly for a minute, and stopped, pretending to look in a window, and saw them further up the street, walking fast in the place of Vendôme. People were much to do. He had nothing to do. Well, he had things to do also. He had to get his laundry. Nothing will ever be the same again, he said to himself. She will never be happy in her marriage, and I will never be happy at all anymore. The 2 vivid years of his love for Caroline moved back around him like years in Einstein's physics. Intolerable memories arose, the rides in the Long Island moonlight, of a happy time at Lake Placid with her cheeks so cold there, but warm just underneath the surface. A despairing afternoon in a little cafe on 48th Street in the last sad months when their marriage had come to seem impossible. Come in, he said aloud. The concierge with the calogram, brusque because Mr. Curly's clothes were a little shabby. Mr. Curly gave few tips. Mr. Curly were obviously a petit client. Michael read the telegram. An answer? The concierge said. No, Michael said in an purpose. Look. Too bad, said the concierge. Your grandfather is dead. Not too bad, said Michael. Means that I come into $250,000. Too late by a single month. After the first flush of the news, his misery was deeper than ever. Lying awake in bed that night, he listened endlessly to the long caravan of circus moving through the street from one Paris fair to another. When the last van had rumbled out of hearing and the corners of the furniture were pastel blue with the dawn, he was still thinking of the look in Caroline's eye that morning. The look that seemed to say, "Oh, why couldn't you have done something about it? Why couldn't you have been a stronger, made me marry you? Don't you see how sad I am? Michael's fist clenched. Well, I won't give up to the last moment, he whispered. I've all the bad luck so far, and maybe it's turned at last. One takes what one can get up to the limit of one's strength. And if I can't have her, at least she'll go into this marriage with some of me in her heart. That's the end of chapter 1. Certainly this is an healthy attitude for a person to have about a person who has clearly moved on. Surely a single glance across a small distance in the city of Paris can tell you everything that is inside of a person's heart. I'm sure this won't go wrong at all. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about this. I did at first feel quite sympathetic to our Michael. You know, someone who was battered down by life's hardships, who had happiness and lost it because he was unable to stand up to things, and of course the financial woes. But the fact that he was quite so pleased about his grandfather's death, even if it left him with a wad of cash, does make him a little bit less sympathetic. And I am always, I must admit, a little disdainful of the hopeless romantic. I think it's the rat in me. I'm a very unromantic sort of creature, me. Still, it'll be interesting. I'm sure it'll be a fun mess. Fitzgerald is good at those. So shall we be about it then? Chapter 2. Accordingly, he went to the party at Chez Victor 2 days later, upstairs and into the little salon off the bar where the party was to assemble for cocktails. He were early. The only other occupant were a tall, lean man of 50. They spoke. Are you waiting for George Peckman's party? Yes, my name's Michael Curley. My name's Michael Fair, I catch the name. They ordered a drink, and Michael supposed the bride and groom were having a gay time. Too much, sir, the other agreed, frowning. I don't see how they're standing. We all crossed on the boat together. 5 days of that crazy life, and then 2 weeks of Paris. You... He hesitated, smiling friendly. You'll excuse me for saying your generation drinks too much. Not Caroline. No, not Caroline. Times to take only a cocktail and a glass of champagne, and then she's had enough, thank God. And Hamilton drinks too much, and then all the crowd of young people drink too much. You live in Paris? For the moment, said Michael. I don't like Paris. My wife, that is to say my ex-wife, Hamilton's mother, lives in Paris. Are you Hamilton Rutherford's father? I have that honour. I'm not denying that I'm proud of what he's done. It was just a general comment. Of course. Martin glanced up nervously as 4 people come in. Whoop. Sorry, we're just having a little bit of an issue. Now back about things, right? Michael glanced up nervously as 4 people come in. He felt suddenly that his dinner coat were old and shiny. He ordered a new one that morning. The people who had come in were rich and at home in their richness with one another. A dark, lovely girl with a hysterical little laugh, whom he had met before. 2 confident men whose jokes referred invariably to the last night's scandal and the night's potentialities, as if they had important roles in a play that extended indefinitely into the past and into the future. When Caroline arrived, Michael had scarcely a moment of her, but were enough to note that, like all the others, she was strained, tired. She was pale beneath her rouge. There were shadows under her eyes. With a mixture of relief and wounded vanity, he found himself placed far from her and at another table. He needed a moment to adjust himself to his surroundings. This were not like the immature set in which he and Caroline had moved. The men were more than 30, and had an air of sharing the best of this world's goods. Next to him were Jevy West, who he knew, and on the other side a jovial man who had immediately begun to talk to Michael about a stunt for the bachelor dinner. They were going to hire a French girl to appear with an actual baby in her arms, crying, "Hamilton, you can't desert me now." The idea seemed stale and amusing to Michael, but its originator shook with anticipatory laughter. Further up the table there were talk of the market. Another drop today, the most appreciable since the crash. People were kidding Rutherford about it. Too bad, old man, you better not get married after all. Michael asked the man to his left, "Has he lost a lot?" "Nobody knows. He's heavily involved, but he's one of the smartest young men in Wall Street. Anyhow, nobody ever tells you the truth." It was a champagne dinner from the start, and towards the end it reached a pleasant level of conviviality. But Michael saw that all these people were too weary to be exhilarated by any ordinary stimulant. For weeks they had drunk cocktails before meals like Americans, wines and brandies like Frenchmen, beer like Germans, whiskey and soda like the English, and they were no longer in their 20s. This preposterous melange that was like some gigantic cocktail and a nightmare served only to make them temporarily less conscious of the mistakes of the night before. Which is to say, they were not really a gay party. What gaiety existed were displayed in the few who drank nothing at all. But Michael were not tired, and the champagne stimulated him and made his misery less acute. He had been away from New York for more than 8 months, and most of the dance music were unfamiliar to him, but the first bars of the Painted Doll, which he and Caroline had moved through so much happiness and despair the previous summer, he crossed to Caroline's table and asked her to dance. She was lovely in a dress of thin ethereal blue. The proximity of her crackly yellow hair, of her cool and tender grey eyes, turned his body clumsy and rigid. He stumbled with their first steps on the floor. For a moment it seemed that there were nothing to say. He wanted to tell her about his inheritance, but the idea seemed abrupt, unprepared for. "Michael, it's so nice to be dancing with you again." He smiled grimly. "I'm so happy you came," she continued. "I was afraid maybe you'd be silly and stay away. Now we could just be good friends and natural together. Michael, I want you and Hamilton to like each other." The engagement was making her stupid. He had never heard her make such a series of obvious remarks before. "I could kill him without a qualm," he said pleasantly. "He looks like a good man. He's fine. What I want to know is, what happens to people like me who aren't able to forget?" As he said this, he could not prevent his mouth from drooping suddenly, and glancing up, Caroline saw, and her heart quivered violently, as it had the other morning. "Do you mind so much, Michael?" "Yes." For a second, as he said this, in a voice that seemed to have come up from his shoes, they were not dancing. They were simply clinging together, and she leaned away from him and twisted her mouth into a lovely smile. "I didn't know what to do at first, Michael. I told Hamilton about you, and I'd cared for you an awful lot. It didn't worry him, and he was right. Because I'm over you now. Yes, I am. And you'll wake up in some sunny morning and be over me just like that." He shook his head stubbornly. "Oh yes, we weren't for each other. I'm pretty flighty, and I need someone like Hamilton to decide things. It was that more than the question of money." Again, he were on the point of telling her what had happened. Again, something told him it were not the time. "How do you account for what happened when we met the other day?" he demanded helplessly. "What happened just now? We just poured towards each other like we used to, as if we were one person, as if the same blood were flowing through both of us." "Oh, don't," she begged him. "You mustn't talk like that. Everything's decided now. I love Hamilton with all my heart. It's just that I remember certain things of the past, and I feel sorry for you, for us, for the way that we were." Over her shoulder, Michael saw a man come towards them to cut in. In a panic, he danced her away, but inevitably the man came on. "I'd like to see you alone, if only for a minute," Michael said quickly. "When can I?" "I'll be at Jebby West's tea tomorrow," she whispered, as an hand fell politely upon Michael's shoulder. But he did not talk to her at Jebby West's tea. Rutherford stood next to her, and each brought the other into all conversations. They left early. The next morning the wedding cards arrived in the first mail. Then Michael, grown desperate with pacing up and down his room, determined on a bold stroke. He wrote to Hamilton Rutherford, asking him for a rendezvous the following afternoon. In a short telephone communications, Rutherford agreed, but for a day later than Michael had asked, and the wedding were only 6 days away. They were to meet in the bar of the Hotel Jena. Michael knew what he would say. "See here, Rutherford, you do realise the responsibility you're taking in going through with this marriage? Do you realise the harvest of trouble you regret you're sowing in persuading her, a girl, into something contrary to the instincts of her heart?" He would explain that the barrier between Caroline and himself had been an artificial one, and were now removed, and demand the matter be put up to Caroline frankly before it were too late. Rutherford would be angry. Conceivably there would be a scene, but Michael felt like he were fighting for his life now. He found Rutherford in conversation with an older man, whom Michael had met at several of the wedding parties. "I saw what happened to most of my friends," Rutherford was saying, "and I decided it wasn't going to happen to me. It isn't so difficult. If you take a girl with common sense and tell her what's what, and do your stuff damn well and play decently square with her, it's a marriage. If you stand for any nonsense at the beginning, it's one of those arrangements. In 5 years the man gets out, and else the girl gobbles him up, and you have the usual mess." "Right," agreed his companion enthusiastically. "Hamilton boy, you're right." Michael's blood boiled slowly. "Doesn't it strike you," he inquired coldly, "your attitude went out of fashion about 100 years ago?" "No, it didn't," said Rutherford pleasantly, but impatiently. "I'm as modern as anybody. I'd get married in an aeroplane next Saturday if it would please my girl." "I don't mean that way of being modern. You can't take a sensitive woman." "Sensitive? Women aren't so damn sensitive. It's a fellow like you who is sensitive. It's fellows like you that they exploit. All your devotion and kindness and all that. They read a couple of books and see a few pictures because they haven't got anything else to do, and then they say they are finer and gayer than you are, and to prove it they just take that bit in their teeth and tear it off. But they're a fare you well, just about as sensitive as a fire horse." "Caroline happens to be sensitive," said Michael in a clipped voice. At this point, the other man got up to go. When the dispute about the cheque had been settled, they were alone. Rutherford leaned back to Michael as if a question had been asked of him. Caroline's more than sensitive, he said. She's got sense. His competitive eyes, meeting Michael's, flickered with a grey light. This all sounds pretty crude to you, Mr. Curley, but it seems to me and the average man nowadays just asks to be made a monkey of by some woman who doesn't even get any fun out of reducing him to that level. There are darn few men who possess their wives anymore, but I'm going to be one of them. To Michael, it seemed time to bring the talk back to the actual situation. Do you realise the responsibility you're taking? I certainly do, interrupted Rutherford. I'm not afraid of responsibility. I'll make the decisions, fairly I hope, but anyhow they'll be final. What if you didn't start right? Said Michael impetuously. What if your marriage isn't founded upon mutual love? I think I see what you mean, Rutherford said. Still pleasant. And since you brought it up, let me say that if you and Caroline had married, it would have lasted 3 years. You know what your affair would have been founded on? On sorrow. You got sorry for each other. Sorrow's a lot of fun for most women, for some men. It seems to me that a marriage ought to be based on hope. He looked at his watch and stood up. I've got to meet Caroline. Remember, you're coming to the bachelor dinner day after tomorrow? Michael felt the moment slipping away. And Caroline's personal feelings don't count with you? He demanded fiercely. Caroline's tired and upset, but she has what she wants, and that's the main thing. Are you referring to yourself? Michael demanded incredulously. Yes. May I ask how long she's wanted you? About 2 years. Before Michael could answer, he was gone. Gotta take a pause there, just take a moment and say, that's very fun dialogue. I like that. This man is such a colossal piece of shit and he's so confident in himself. That's great, love that. During the next 2 days, Michael floated in an abyss of helplessness. The idea haunted him that he had left something undone that would sever this knot drawn tight under his eyes. He phoned Caroline, but she insisted that it was physically impossible for her to see him until the day before the wedding, for which day she granted him a tentative rendezvous. Then he went to the bachelor dinner, partly in fear of an evening alone at his hotel, partly from a feeling that his presence at that function he was somehow nearer to Caroline, keeping her in sight. The Ritz bar had been prepared for the occasion by French and American banners and by a great canvas covering one wall, against which the guests were invited to concentrate their proclivities in breaking glasses. At the first cocktail, taken at the bar, there were many slight spillings from many trembling hands, but later, with the champagne, there were a rising tide of laughter and occasional bursts of song. Michael was surprised to find what a difference his new dinner coat, his new silk hat, his new proud linen made in his estimate of himself. He felt less resentment towards all these people for being so rich and assured. For the first time since he had left college, he felt rich and assured himself. He felt they were a part of all this, and even into the schemes of Johnson, the practical joker, the appearance of the woman betrayed, now waiting tranquilly in the room across the hall. "I don't want to be too heavy," Johnson said, "as I imagine Ham's been a pretty anxious day already. You see Fulham and Ale 16 points off this morning." "Oh, will that matter to him?" Michael asked, trying to keep his interest out of it. "Naturally, he's in heavily. He's always in everything heavily. So far he's had luck. Anyhow, up to a month ago." The glasses were filled and emptied faster now, and men were shouting at one another across the narrow table. Against the bar, a group of ushers were being photographed, and the flashlights surged through the room in a stifling cloud. "Now's the time," Johnson said. "You're to stand by the door, remember, and we're both to try and keep her from coming in, just until we get everybody's attention." He went out in the corridor, and Michael waited obediently by the door. Several minutes passed, and Johnson reappeared with a curious expression on his face. "There's something funny about this. Isn't the girl there?" "She's there, all right, but there's another woman there too. It's nobody engaged either. She wants to see Hamilton Rutherford, and she looks as if she has something on her mind." They went out into the hall. Planted firmly in a chair near the door sat an American girl, a little the worse for the liquor, but with a determined expression on her face. She looked up at them with a jerk of her head. "Don't you tell him?" she demanded. "My name is Marahina Collins, and you'll know it. I've come a long way, and I want to see him now and quick. There's going to be a lot more trouble than you ever saw." She rose unsteadily to her feet. "You go in and tell Ham," whispered Johnson to Michael. "Maybe you'd better get out. I'll keep her here." Back at the table, Michael leaned close to Rutherford's ear, and with a certain grimness whispered, "A girl outside named Marjorie Collins says she wants to see you. She looks as if she wanted to make trouble." Hamilton Rutherford blinked, and his mouth fell ajar. Then slowly the lip came together in a straight line, and he said in a crisp voice, "Please keep her there, and send the head barman to me right away." Michael spoke with the barman, and then, without returning to the table, asked quietly for his coat and his hat. At the hall again, he passed Johnson and the girl without speaking, and went out in the Rue Cambon. Calling a cab, he gave the address of Caroline's hotel. His place was beside her now, not to bring bad news, but simply to be with her when the house of cards came falling around her head. Rutherford implied he was soft. Well, he were hard enough to not give up the girl he loved without taking advantage of every chance that within the pale of honour. Should she turn away from Rutherford, she would find him there. She were him. She was surprised when he called, but she was still dressed and would get you down immediately. Presently she appeared in a dinner gown, holding up two blue telegrams in her hand. They sat down in armchairs in the deserted lobby. Michael, is the dinner over? I want to see you, so I'll come away. I'm glad. Her voice was friendly but matter of fact. Because I'd just phoned your hotel that I had fittings and rehearsals all day tomorrow. Now we can have our talk after all. You're tired, he guessed. Perhaps I shouldn't have come. No, I was reading up for Hamilton. Telegrams that may be important. He said he might go on somewhere and there may be many, and that may mean any hour. So I'm glad I have someone to talk to. Michael winced at the impersonality in the last phrase. Don't you care when he gets home? Naturally, she said, laughing. But I haven't got much to say about it, have I? Why not? I couldn't start by telling him what he could and couldn't do. Why not? He wouldn't stand for it. He seems to want merely a housekeeper, said Michael ironically. Tell me about your plans, Michael, she asked quickly. My plans? I can't see any future after the day after tomorrow. The only real plan I ever had was to love you. Her eyes brushed past each other's, and the look he knew so well was staring out in front, staring out at him from hers. Words flew quickly from his heart. Let me tell you just one more how well I've loved you. Never wavering for a moment, never thinking of another girl. And now when I think of all the years ahead without you, without any hope, I don't want to live, Caroline, darling. I used to dream about our children, about holding you in my arms and touching your face and hands and hair that used to belong to me. And I just can't wake up. Caroline was crying softly. Poor Michael, poor Michael. Her hand reached out and her fingers brushed the lapel of his dinner coat. I was so sorry for you the other night. You looked so thin, as if you needed a new suit and somebody to take care of you. She smiled and looked more closely at his coat. Why, you've got a new suit. And a new silk hat. Why, Michael, how swell. She laughed suddenly, cheerfully through her tears. You must have come into money, Michael. I never saw you so well turned out. For a moment, at her reaction, he hated his new clothes. I have come into money, he said. My grandfather left me about $250,000. Why, Michael, she cried, how perfectly swell. I can't tell you how glad I am. I've always thought you were the sort of person who just ought to have money. Yes, just do like to make a difference. The revolving door from the street groaned around, and Hamilton Rutherford came into the lobby. His face was flushed, his eyes were restless and impatient. Hello, darling. Hello, Mr. Curly. He bent and kissed Caroline. I broke away for a minute to find out if I had any telegrams. I see you've got them. Taking them from her, he remarked to Curly. That were an odd business in the bar, wasn't it? Especially as I understand some of you had a joke fixed up at the same line. He opened one of the telegrams, closed it, and turned to Caroline with a divided expression of a man carrying two things in his head at once. A girl I haven't seen for 2 years has turned up, he said. It seems to be some clumsy form of blackmail, for I haven't and never had any sort of obligation towards her whatever. What happened? The head barman had a Sûreté Générale man in 10 minutes and it was settled in the hall. The French blackmail law made ours look like a sweet wish, and I gather they flew a scare into her that she'll remember. It seems wiser to tell you. You implying that I mentioned the matter? Said Michael stiffly. No, Rutherford said slowly. No, you were just going to be on hand, and since you're here, I'll tell you some news that will interest you even more. He handed Michael one telegram and opened the other. This is in code, Michael said. It says this, and I've got to know all the words pretty well this last week. The two of them together mean I'm due to start life all over. Michael saw Caroline's face grow a shade paler, and she got quiet as a mouse. It was a mistake, and I stuck to it too long, continued Rutherford. You see, I don't have all the luck, Mr. Curly. By the way, they tell me you've come into money. Yes, said Michael. There we are then. Rutherford turned to Caroline. You understand, darling, that I'm not joking or exaggerating. I've lost almost every cent I have, and I'm starting life over. Two pairs of eyes were regarding her. Rutherford's non-committal and unrequiring. Michael's hungry, tragic, pleading. In a minute she had raised herself from the chair and with a little cry thrown herself into Hamilton Rutherford's arms. Oh, darling, she cried, what does it matter? It's better. I like it better, honestly I do. I want to start that way. I want to. Oh, please don't worry, I'll be sad even for a minute. All right, baby, said Rutherford, his hand stroked her hair gently for a moment, and he took his arm from round her. I promised to join the party for an hour, he said. So I'll say good night, and I want you to go to bed soon and get a good sleep. Good night, Mr. Curly. I'm sorry to have let you in for all these financial matters. But Michael had already picked up his hat and came. I'll go along with you, he said. That's the end of chapter 3. Well, that seems pretty clear there that well, it's a pretty unpleasant reversal for him, but yeah. Immediately, all of his thoughts are disproved. She didn't end up leaving for his lack of money because this man, who seems very unpleasant and only to be providing money, has just lost everything, as was pretty clearly hinted at earlier, and is now still enjoying the tender embraces of her company. And it all seemed to be going so well there for him for a little bit. Oh well. It will never go end happily for him. He's in a Fitzgerald short story. Still, not much else to say, so let's press on. Part 3. It was such a fun morning. Michael's cutaway hadn't been delivered, so he felt rather uncomfortable passing before the cameras and moving picture machines in front of the little church on the avenues George sunk. It was such a clean, new church that it seemed unforgivable not to be dressed properly, and Michael, white and shaky after a sleepless night, decided to stand in the rear. From there he looked at the back of Hammond and Rutherford, and the lacy, flimsy back of Caroline, and the fat back of George Patman, which looked unsteady, as if it wanted to lean against the bride and groom. The ceremony went on for a long time under the gay flags and pennons overhead, under the thick gleams of June sunlight slanting down through the tail windows upon the well-dressed people. As the procession headed up by the bride and groom started down the aisle, Michael realised with alarm he was just where everyone would be dispensed with the parade stiffness, become informal and speak to him. So it turned out. Rutherford and Caroline spoke fast to him, Rutherford grim with the strain of being married, and Caroline lovelier than he had ever seen her, floating all softly down through the past and forward to the future by the sunlit door. Michael managed to murmur, "Beautiful, simply beautiful." And then other people passed and spoke to him. Old Mrs. Dandy, straight from her sickbed, and looking remarkably well, carrying it off like the very fine old lady she was. And Rutherford's father and mother, 10 years divorced, but walking side by side and looking made for each other and proud. Then all Caroline's sisters and her husbands and her little nephews in the Eton suits, and then a long parade, all speaking to Michael because he was still standing paralysed just at that point where the procession broke. He wondered what would happen now. Cards had been issued for a reception at the George Sank, an expensive enough place, heaven knows. Will Rutherford try and get through that on top of these disastrous telegrams? Evidently, for the procession outside was streaming up there, though, through the June morning, 3 by 3 and 4 by 4. On the corner of the long dresses of girls, farther breast fluttered many-coloured in the wind. Girls had become gossamer again, perambulatory flora, such lovely fluttering dresses in the bright noon wind. Michael needed a drink. He couldn't face that reception line without a drink. Diving into a side doorway of the hotel, he asked for the bar, whither a chasseur led him through half a kilometre of new American-looking passages. But, how did it happen? The bar was full. There were 10, 15 men and 2, 4 girls, all from the wedding, all needing a drink. There were cocktails and champagne in the bar. Rutherford's cocktails and champagne, as it turned out, for he engaged the old bar and the ballroom and 2 great reception rooms and all the stairways leading up and down, and windows looking out over the old square block of Paris. By and by, Michael went and joined the long, slow drift of the receiving line. Through a flowery mist, such a lovely wedding, and my dear, you were simply lovely. You're a lucky man, Rutherford. He passed down the line. When Michael came to Caroline, she took a single step forward and kissed him on the lips, but he felt no contact in the kiss. It was unreal, and he floated on away from it. Old Mrs. Dandy, who had always liked him, held his hand for a minute and thanked him for the flowers he had sent, when he heard she was ill. "I'm so sorry not to have written. You know we little old ladies are grateful for the flowers that she had not written the wedding." Michael saw they all had the same relative importance to her now. She had married off 5 other children and seen 2 of the marriages go to pieces. And this scene, so poignant, so confusing to Michael, appeared to her simply a familiar charade in which she had played her part before. A buffet luncheon with champagne were already being served at small tables, and there were an orchestra playing in the empty ballroom. Michael sat down with Jebby West. He was still a little embarrassed at not wearing a morning coat, but he perceived now that he were not alone in the omission and felt better. "Wasn't Caroline divine?" Jebby West said. "So entirely self-possessed. I asked her this morning if she wasn't a little nervous at stepping off like this, and she said, 'Why should I be? I've been after him 2 years, and now I'm just as happy, that's all.'" "Must be true," said Michael gloomily. "What?" "What you just stated." He had been stabbed, but rather to his distress he did not feel the wound. He asked Jebby to dance. Out on the floor, Rutherford's father and mother were dancing together. "Makes me a little sad, that," she said. "The 2 hadn't met for years. Both of them were married again, and she divorced again. She went to the station to meet him when he came over for Caroline's wedding and invited him to stay with her house in the Avenue du Bois with a whole lot of other people, perfectly proper. But he was afraid his wife would hear about it and not like it, so he went to a hotel. Don't you think that's sort of sad? An hour or so later, Michael realised suddenly that it were afternoon. In one corner of the ballroom, an arrangement of screens, like a moving picture stage, had been set up, and photographers were taking official pictures of the bridal party. The bridal party, still as deaf and pale as wax under the bright lights, appeared to the dancers circling in the modulated semi-darkness of the ballroom, like those jovial or sinister groups that one comes upon in the old mill or an amusement park. After the bridal party had been photographed, there were a group of ushers, then bridesmaids and the families, children, like Caroline, active and excited, having long since abandoned the repose implicit in her flowing dress. A great bouquet came and plucked Michael off the floor. Now we'll have them take one of just old friends. A voice implied that this was the best, most intimate of all. Come here, Jebby. George, not you, Hamilton. This is just my friend, Sally. A little after that, what remained of formality disappeared, and the hours flowed easily down the profuse stream of champagne. In the modern fashion, Hamilton Rutherford sat at the table with his arms around an old girl of his, and assured his guests, which included not a few bewildered but enthusiastic Europeans, that the party were not nearly at an end. It was to reassemble at Zelly's after midnight. Michael saw Mrs. Dandy, not quite over her illness, to rise to go and become caught in polite group after group, and he spoke of it to one of her daughters, who thereupon forcibly abducted her mother and called her car. Michael felt very considerate and proud of himself after having done this, and drank much more champagne. It's amazing, George Benton was telling them enthusiastically. The show will cost Hamilton about $5,000, and I understand that it's just about his last. But did he countermand a bottle of champagne or a flower? No. Not he. He happens to have it, that young man. You know that T.G. Vance offered him a salary of $50,000 a year 10 minutes before the wedding this morning. In another year he'll be back with the millionaires. The conversation was interrupted by a plan that carried Rutherford out on communal shoulders. A plan which 6 of them put into effect, and then stood in the 4 o'clock sunshine waving goodbye to the bride and groom. But there must have been a mistake somewhere, for 5 minutes later Michael saw both bride and groom descending the stairway to the reception, each with a glass of champagne held defiantly on eye. This is our way of doing things, he thought, generous and fresh and free. A sort of Virginia plantation hospitality, but at a different pace now, nervous as ticker tape. Standing unselfconsciously in the middle of the room to see which were the American ambassador, he realised with a start that he hadn't really thought of Caroline for hours. He looked about him with a sort of alarm, and he saw her across the room, very bright and young and radiantly happy. He saw Rutherford near her, looking at her as if they could never look at it long enough. And Michael watched them, they seemed to recede, as he had wished them to do in the day at the Rue de Castiglione, recede and fade off into joys and griefs of their own, into the years that would take the toll of Rutherford's farm pride and Caroline's young and moving beauty. They were far away, so that now he could scarcely see them, as if they were shrouded in something as misty as her white billowing dress. Michael was cured. The ceremonial function, with its pomp and its revelry, had stood for a sort of initiation into a life where even his regrets could not follow them. All the bitterness melted out of him suddenly, and the world reconstituted itself out of the youth and happiness that were all around him. Profligate as the spring sunshine, He was trying to remember which one of his bridesmaids he had made a date to dine with tonight, as he walked forward to bid Hamilton and Caroline Rutherford goodbye. That's the end of things. And you know, I have to admit it, I was wrong. That is, I think, a surprisingly happy ending. Sure, he didn't get what he wanted, and indeed his whole attempt to win back his girl was very ill-fated indeed. But he changed. He got over it. In fact, duly enough, everyone seems happy. Rutherford is broke, certainly, but he's happily married, very clearly happily married, to a woman who he knows is devoted to him, and a salary of $50,000, which I think is pretty decent even nowadays, never mind in the 1920s. He'll be back on top inside a year. Our Michael has gotten over himself, has seen that the world has changed around him, that he's imagining all these memories of joy that keep coming up to him, and he has a chance to move on again. Maybe with this bridesmaid who's made arrangements to have dinner with. He does good things by helping Caroline's mother get back to her I'm just going to get back to her own place at a comfortable pace. He's a better man. Everyone comes out on top. It's quite dismal in the sort of tones and themes of it, but my lord, an happy ending to a Fitzgerald story. Never thought I would see the day. Well, there we go. Yeah, I don't think I've got much else to say in this regard. So rather than lingering on this, which admittedly, I quite like that was better than I was expecting it to be. I quite enjoyed that. So rather than linger on it and toy it to death, let's move on over to The Stolen White Elephant by Mark Twain, which is the only Twain we've got today. It's the only new Twain, I should say. Got lots of Twains here. Yeah, The Stolen White Elephant, which is I think slightly shorter than slightly shorter than the Fitzgerald we just had, the bridal part, the bridal party. But I think we'll probably carry us through the hour. I'm looking forward to this one. I do like a bit of Twain, and I don't know. I must say that he's a bit hit and miss by my standards. I think I really like his voice, but I think I generally only like it when it's positive or upbeat or he's really on it. But I don't know. I'm hopeful. I always think, here's the thing. Some Twain stories I'm quite disappointed by, but I never go into a Twain story thinking I'm going to be disappointed. I'll say that for him. It's also true of Fitzgerald now I think about it. I've never disliked one of his stories. So, but yeah, I'm rambling on. Let's get this read or we're never going to do it, aren't we? Actually, before I start reading, let's do something else a little bit clever and have a drink of water, so I don't ruin my throat. Look, I'm doing a big event inside 5 days now? God. I better get used to it by then or I'm going to be hurting myself. Right. So, here we are. The Stolen White Elephant. And the little editorial note that these editions have. Spoofing the roles of detectives who were commonly championed in the popular fiction of the period, The Stolen White Elephant were first published in a volume of the same name by James R. Osgood and Company in 1882. Chapter 1. The following curious history were related to me by a chance railway acquaintance. He was a gentleman more than 70 years of age, and his thoroughly good and gentle face and earnest and sincerest manner imprinted the unmistakable stamp of truth upon every statement which fell from his lips. He said, "You know in what reverence the royal white elephant of Siam is held by the people of that country. You know it is sacred to kings, only kings may possess it, and that it is indeed a measure even superior to kings, since it receives not only honour but worship. Very well. 5 years ago, when the troubles concerning the frontier line arose between Great Britain and Siam, it would presently manifest that Siam had been in the wrong. Therefore, every reparation was quickly made, and the British representative stated that he was satisfied, and the past should be forgotten. This greatly relieved the King of Siam, and partly as a token of gratitude, but partly also, perhaps, to wipe out any little remaining vestiges of unpleasantness which England might feel towards him, he wished to send the Queen a present, the social way of propitiating an enemy according to Oriental ideas. This present ought not only be a royal one, but transcendently royal. Wherefore, what offering could be so meet as that of the white elephant? My position in the Indian civil service was such that I would deem particularly worthy of the honour of conveying the present to her. There's a little footnote here with a little star, but I don't see the star anywhere. Oh well. My position in the Indian civil service was such that I would deem particularly worthy of the honour of conveying the present to her Majesty. A ship was fitted out for me and my servants and officers and attendants and the elephants, and in due time I arrived in New York Harbour and placed my royal charge in an admirable quarter in Jersey City. It would necessarily remain a while in order to recruit the animal's health before assuming the voyage. All went well during the fortnight. Then my calamities began. The white elephant was stolen. I was called up at dead of night and informed of this fearful misfortune. For some moments I was beside myself with terror and anxiety. I was helpless. Then I grew calmer and collected my faculties. I soon saw my course, for indeed there were but one course for an intelligent man to pursue. Late as it was, I flew to New York and got a policeman to conduct me to a headquarters of the detective force. Fortunately, I arrived on time, and the chief of the force, the celebrated Inspector Blum, was just at the point of leaving for his own. He was a man of middle size and compact frame, and we were thinking deep he had a way of knitting his brows and tapping his forehead reflectively with his finger, which impressed you at once with the conviction that you stood in the presence of a person of no common order. The very sight of him gave me confidence and made me hopeful. I stated my errand. It did not flurry him in the least. It had no more visible effect upon his iron self-possession than if I had told him somebody had stolen my dog. He motioned me to my seat and said calmly, "Allow me to think a moment, please." So saying, he sat down at his office table and leaned his head upon his hands. Several clerks were at work on the other end of the room, and scratching their pens with all the sound I heard during the next 6 or 7 minutes. Meantime, the inspector sat there, buried in thought. Finally, he raised his head, and there were that in the firm lines of his face which showed me that his brain had done its work, and a plan was made. Said he, in a voice low and impressive, "This is no ordinary case. Every step must be warily taken. Each step must be made sure before its next mentioned, and secrecy must be observed, secrecy profound and absolute. Speak to no one about the matter, not even the reporters. I will take care of them. I will see to it they only get what may suit my ends to let them know." He touched a bell, a youth appeared. "Alaric, tell the reporters to remain for the present." The boy retired. "Now let's proceed to business. And systematically, nothing can be accomplished in this trade of mine without strict and minute method." He took a pen and some paper. "Now, name of the elephant?" "Anson Ben Ali Ben Selim Abdullah Mohammed Morsi Al Hamal Jamshedji Bahoy Dulhib Sultan Ebu Budapur." "Very well. Given name?" "Jumba." "Very well. Place of birth?" "The capital city of Siam." "Parents living?" "No, dead." "Had they any other issues beside this one?" "None. He was an only child." "Very well. Is matter sufficient under that head? Now please describe the elephant, and leave out no particular, however insignificant, that is insignificant from your point of view. To men in my possession there are no insignificant particulars. They do not exist." I described, he wrote. When I was done, he said, "Now listen. If I have made any mistake, correct me." He read as follows. Height, 19 feet. Length from apex of forehead to insertion of tail, 26 feet. Length of trunk, 16 feet. Length of tail, 6 feet. Total length, including trunk and tail, 48 feet. Length of tusks, 9.5 feet. Ears in keeping with these dimensions. Footprint resembles the mark left when one upends a barrel in the snow. Colour of the elephant, a dull white. Has a hole the size of a plate in each ear. For the insertion of jewellery and possesses the habit in remarkable degree of squirting water upon spectators and of maltreating with his trunk, not only such persons as he is acquainted with, but even entire strangers. Limps slightly with his right hind leg, and has a small scar in his left armpit caused by a former boil. Had on, when stolen, a castle containing seats for 15 persons and a gold cloth saddle blanket the size of an ordinary cup. There were no mistakes. The inspector touched the bell and at the description of Alaric and said, "Have 50,000 copies of this printed out at once and mailed to every detective office and pawnbroker's shop in the continent." Alaric retired. "There, so far so good. Next I must have a photograph of the property." I gave him one. He examined it critically and said, "It must do, since we can't do no better. But he has a trunk curled up and tucked into his mouth. That is unfortunate, and is calculated to mislead, for of course he does not usually have it in that position." He touched his bell. "Alaric, have 50,000 copies of this photograph made, the first thing in the morning, and mail them with the description of circulars." Alaric retired to execute his orders. The inspector said, "It will be necessary to offer a reward, of course. As to the amount, what sum would you suggest?" "To begin with, I should say, well, $25,000. It is an intricate and difficult business. There are 1,000 avenues of escape and opportunities of concealment. These thieves have friends and pals everywhere." "Bless me, you know where they are?" The very face, practised in concealing the thoughts or feelings within, gave me no token, nor the reply in the words so quietly uttered. "Never mind about that. I may and I may not. I generally gather a pretty shrewd inkling of who our man is by the manner of his work and the size of the game he goes after. We are not dealing with a pickpocket or a horn thief now. Make up your mind to that. The property was not lifted by a novice. But as I was saying, considering the amount of travel which will have to be done and the diligence with which the thieves will cover up their traces as they move along, 25,000 may be too small a sum to offer. Yet I think it worth it to start out with that." So we determined upon the figure as a beginning, and the man who nothing escaped which could by any possibility be made to serve as a clue said, "There are cases in detective history that show that criminals have been detected through peculiarities in their appetites. Now, what does this elephant eat and how much?" "Well, as to what he eats, he will eat anything. He will eat a man, he will eat a Bible, he will eat anything between a man and a Bible." Good, very good indeed. Too general. Details are necessary. Details are the only valuable thing in our trade. Very well. As to men, at one meal, or if you prefer during one day, how many men will he eat if fresh? He would not care whether they are fresh or not. In a single meal, he would eat 5 ordinary men. Very good, 5 men. We will put that down. What nationalities would he prefer? He's indifferent about nationalities. He prefers acquaintances, but he's not prejudiced against strangers. Very good. Now, as to Bibles, how many Bibles would he eat at a meal? He would eat an entire edition. It's hardly succinct enough. You mean the ordinary octava or the family illustrated? I think he would be indifferent to the illustrations. That is, I think he would not value the illustrations above simple letterpress. No, you do not get my idea. I refer to the bulk. The ordinary octavo Bible weighs about 2 pounds and a half, while the great quarto with illustrations weighs 10 or 12. How many Doré Bibles would he eat at a meal? If you knew this elephant, you would not ask. You would take what they had. And put it in dollars and cents then. Must get it somehow. The Doré here cost $100 a copy, Russia leather beveled. Yeah. The Doré cost $100 a copy, Russia leather beveled. You would require about $50,000 worth, say an edition of 500 copies. Now that is more exact. I'll put that down. Very well. He likes men and Bibles. So far, so good. What else would he eat? I want particulars. He will leave Bibles to eat bricks. He will leave bricks to eat bottles. He will leave bottles to eat clothing. He will leave clothing to eat cats. He will leave cats to eat oysters. He will leave oysters to eat ham. He will leave ham to eat sugar. He will leave sugar to eat pie. He will leave pie to eat potatoes, and he'll leave potatoes to eat bran. He'll leave bran to eat A. He'll leave A to eat oats, and he will leave oats to eat rice, for he was mainly raised on it. There's nothing whatever that he will not eat but European bar, and that he would not eat if he could taste it. And that he would eat, and he would eat that if he could taste it. Very good. General quantity of the meal, say about anywhere from 1/4 to 1/2 ton. And he drinks everything that's fluid: milk, water, whiskey, molasses, castor oil, camphene, cambolic acid. It's no use to go into particulars. Whatever fluid occurs to you, set it down. You'll drink anything that is fluid except European coffee. Very good. And as to quantity, put down 5 to 15 barrels. This thus varies as other appetites do not. These things are unusual. They ought to furnish quite a good clue as towards tracing them. He touched the bell. Alex summoned Captain Burns. Burns appeared, and Inspector Blunt unfolded the old matter to him, detail by detail. Then he said in the clear, decisive tones of a man who plans, clearly defined in his head, and who is accustomed to command. Captain Burns, Detail Detective Jones, Davis, Halsey, Bates, and Hackett, the Shadow the Elephant. Yes, sir. Detail Detectives Moses, Dakin, Murphy, Rogers, Tupley, Higgins, and Bartholomew, the Shadow the Thieves. Yes, sir. There's a strong guard, a guard of 30 picked men, with a relief of 30, over the place from whence the elephant was stolen, to keep strict watch there night and day, and allow none to approach, except reporters, without written authority from me. Yes, sir. Place detectives in plain clothes in the whaleways, steamships, and ferry depots, and upon all roadways leading out of Jersey City, with orders to search all suspicious persons. Yes, sir. Furnish all these men with a photograph and accompanying descriptions of the elephant, and instruct them to search all trains and outgoing ferryboats and other vessels. Yes, sir. If the elephant should be found, let it be seized, and if the information forwarded to me by telegraph. Yes, sir. Let them be informed at once if any clue should be found, footprints of the animal, or anything of that kind. Yes, sir. Get an orderly commanding the harbour police to patrol the frontages vigilantly. Yes, sir. Dispatch detectives in plain clothes over all the railways, north as far as Canada, west as far as Ohio, south as far as Washington. Yes, sir. Place experts in all the telegraph offices to listen to all messages, and let them require that all cipher dispatches be interpreted to them. Yes, sir. Let all these things be done without most secrecy, mind, the most impenetrable secrecy. Yes, sir. Report to me promptly at the usual hour. Yes, sir. Go! Yes, sir. He was gone. Inspector Blunt was silent and thoughtful for a moment, while the fire in his eye cooled down and faded out. Then he turned to me and said in a placid voice, "I am not given to boasting. It is not my habit, but we shall find that elephant." I shook him warmly by the hand and thanked him. And I felt my thanks too. The more I had seen of the man, the more I liked him, and the more I admired him, and marvelled over the many mysterious wonders of his profession. Then we parted for the night, and I went home with a far happier heart than I had carried with me to his office. Next morning, it were all in the newspapers, in the minutest detail. They even had additions, consisting of detective this, detective that, and detective the other's theory as to how the robbery were done, who the robbers were, and whether they had flown with their booty. There are 11 of these theories, and they covered all possibilities, and this single fact shows what independent thinkers detectives are. No 2 theories were alike, or even much resembled each other, save in one strike in particular, and in that one all 11 theories were absolutely agreed. That was that, although the rear of my building were torn out and the only door remained locked, the elephant had not been removed through the rent, but by some other undiscovered outlet. All agreed the robbers had made the rent only to mislead the detectives. That never would have occurred to me or to any other layman, perhaps, but it had not deceived the detectives for a moment. That's what I had supposed were the only thing that had no mystery about it, were in fact the very thing I had gone furthest astray in. The 11 theories all named the supposed robber, but no 2 named the same robbers. The total number of suspected persons were 37. The various newspaper accounts all closed with the most important opinion of all, that of Chief Inspector Blunt. A portion of his statement read as follows. The Chief knows who the principals are, namely Brick Duffy and Red McFadden. 10 days before the robbery were achieved, they were already aware that it was to be attempted, and had quietly proceeded to shadow these two noted villains, but unfortunately on the night in question their track were lost, and before it could be found again the bird were flown, that is the elephant. Duffy and McFadden, the boldest scoundrels in the profession. The Chief has reasons for believing they are the men who stole the stove at the detective headquarters on a bitter night last winter, in consequence of which the Chief and every detective present were in the hands of the physicians before morning, some with frozen feet, others with frozen fingers, ears, and other members. When I read the first half of that, I was more astonished than ever at the wonderful sagacity of this strange man. He had not only saw everything in the present with a clear eye, but even the future could not be hidden from him. I was soon at his office and said I could not help but wishing he had had those men arrested and so prevented the trouble and loss, but the reply was simple and unanswerable. It is not our province to prevent crime, but to punish it. We cannot punish it until it is committed. I remarked that the secrecy with which he had begun had been marred by the newspapers. Not only all our facts, but our plans and purposes had been revealed, and even all the suspected persons had been named. These would doubtless disguise themselves now or go and hide them. Let them. They will find that when I am ready for them, my hand will descend upon them in their secret places as unerringly as the hand of fate. As to the newspapers, we must keep in with them. Fame, reputation, constant public mention, these are the detective's bread and butter. He must publish his facts, else he will be supposed to have none. He must publish his theory, for nothing is so strange or striking as a detective's theory, or brings him so much wondering respect. We must publish our plans, for these the journals insist upon having, and we could not deny them without offending. We must constantly show the public that we are doing, or they will believe we are doing nothing. It is much pleasanter to have a newspaper say Inspector Blunt's ingenious and extraordinary theory is as follows, than have it say some harsh thing, or worse still, some sarcastic one. I see the force of what you say, but I noticed that in one part of your remarks in the papers this morning you refused to reveal your opinion upon a certain minor point. Yes, we always do that. It has a good effect. Besides, I had not formed any opinion on that point anyway. I deposited a considerable sum of money with the inspector to meet current expenses, and sat down and wait for news. We were expecting the telegrams to begin to arrive at any moment now. Meantime, I reread the newspapers and also a descriptive circular, and observed that our $25,000 reward seemed to be offered only to detectives. I said I thought it ought to be offered to anybody who would catch the elephant. The inspector said, "It is the detectives who will find the elephant, hence the reward will go to the right place. If other people found the animal, it would only be by watching the detective and taking advantage of clues and indications stolen from them, and that would entitle the detectives to the reward after all. The proper office of a reward is to stimulate the men who delve upon their time and train sagacities in this sort of work, and not to confer benefits upon chance citizens who stumble upon a capture without having earned the benefits by their own merits and labours." It's reasonable enough, certainly. Now the telegraphic machine in the corner began to click, and following dispatch with the result. Flower Station, NY, 7:30 AM. I've got a clue. Found a succession of deep tracks across a farm near here. Followed them 2 miles east without result. Think elephant went west. Shall now shadow him in that direction. Darley, detective. Darley is one of the best men in the force, said the inspector. We shall hear from him again before long. Telegram number 2 came. Parker, New Jersey, 7:40 AM. Just arrived. Glass factory broken open here during the night and 800 bottles taken. Only water in large quantity near here is 5 miles distant. Shall strike for there. Elephant will be thirsty. Bottles are empty. Baker, detective. That promises well too, said the inspector. I told you the creature's appetite would not be bad clues. Telegram number 3. Taylorville, LR, 8:15 AM. A haystack near here has disappeared during the night. Probably eaten. I've got a clue I'm off. Other detective. Oh, he does move around, said the inspector. I knew how he had a difficult job on hand, but we should catch him yet. Flower Station, NY, 9 AM. Shadowed the tracks 3 miles westward. Large, deep and ragged. I've just met a farmer who says they are not elephant tracks. Says they are holes where he dug up saplings for shade trees when the ground were frozen last winter. Give me orders to proceed. Darley, detective. Aha, confident and confederate of the thieves. This thing grows warm, said the inspector. He dictated the following telegram to Dudley. Arrest the man and force him to name his paths. Continue to follow the tracks to the Pacific if necessary. Chief Blunt. Next telegram. Coney Point, PA, 8:45 AM. Gas office broken open here during the night and 3 months unpaid gas bills taken. I've got a clue and I'm away. Murphy, detective. Heavens, the inspector said. Why would he eat gas bills? For ignorance, yes, but I cannot support laugh. At least I assisted. Now came this exciting telegram. Ironville, New York, 9:30 AM. Just arrived. This village in consternation. Elephant passed through here at 5 this morning. Some say he went east, some say west, some north, some south, but all say they did not wait and notice particularly. He killed an horse. I've secured a piece of it for a clue. Killed it with his trunk from style of blow. Think he struck it left-handed from position of which the horse lies. Think elephant travelled northward along lines of Berkeley Railway. Has 4.5 hours start, but I move on his track at once. Oars, detective. I uttered exclamations of joy. The inspector was self-contained as a graven image, and calmly touched the bell. Erickson, Captain Burns here. Burns appeared. How many men are ready for instant orders? 96, sir. Send them north at once. Let them concentrate along the line of the Berkeley Road north of Ironville. Yes, sir. They conduct their movements with utmost secrecy, as fast as others are at liberty. Hold them for orders. Yes, sir. Go. Yes, sir. Presently come another telegram. Sage Corner, New York, 10:30. Just arrived. Elephant passed through here at 8:15. All escaped from the town but a policeman. Apparently elephant did not strike a policeman, but the lamppost. Got both. I have secured a portion of the policeman as a clue. Stum, detective. So the elephant has turned westward, said the inspector. However, he will not escape, for my men are scattered all over that region. The next telegram said, Glover's, 11:15. Just arrived. Village deserted except sick and aged. Elephant passed through 3/4 an hour ago. The anti-temperance mass meeting were in session, but he put his trunk in a window and washed it out with water from the cistern. Some swallowed it, since dead. Several drowned. Electric Cross and O'Shaughnessy were passing through town, but going south, so missed Elephant. Whole region for many miles around here in terror. People flying from their homes. Whenever they turn, they meet Elephant, and many are killed. Dan, detective. I could have shed tears, this havoc so distressed me, but the inspector only said, You see, we are closing in on him. He feels our presence. He has turned eastward again. And further troublous news were in store for us. The telegraph brought this. Hoganport, 12:19. Just arrived. Elephant passed through half an hour ago, creating wildest fright and excitement. Elephant raised around the streets, 2 plumbers going by, killed one, other escaped. Regret general. No flight E, detective. Now he's right in the midst of my men, said the inspector. Nothing can save him. A succession of telegrams came from the detectives who were scattered throughout New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and were following clues consisting of ravaged barns, factories, and Sunday school libraries. But no hopes. Hopes amount to certainties, indeed. The inspector said, I wish I could communicate with them and order them north, but that is impossible. The detective only visits the telegraph office to send his report, and then he is off again. And you don't know when to put your hand on him. Knock on this dispatch. Bridgeport, CT, 12:15. Barnum offers rate of $4,000 a year for exclusive privilege of using Elephant as travelling advertisement medium for advertising medium from now till detectives find him. Wants to pay circus posters on him. Desires immediate answer. Bob's detective. That is perfectly absurd, I exclaimed. Of course it is, said the inspector. Evidently Mr. Barnum, who thinks he is so sharp, does not know me, but I know him. And he dictated this answer to the dispatch. Mr. Barnum's offer declined. Make it 7,000 or nothing. Chief Bunt. Yeah, we shall not have to wait long for an answer. Mr. Barnum is not at home. He's in the telegraph office. It is his way. When he has business on hand, inside of 3, done. P.T. Barnum. So interrupted the clicking telegraphic instrument. Before I could make a comment upon this extraordinary episode, the following dispatch carried through my thoughts into another and very distressing channel. Bolivia, New York, 12:50. Elephant arrived there from the south and passed through towards the forest at 11:50, dispersing the funeral on the way and diminishing the mourners by 2. Citizens fired some small cannonballs into him and then fled. Detective Burke and I arrived 10 minutes later from the north, but mistook some excavations for footprints and so lost a good deal of time. At last we struck the right trail and followed it to the woods. We then got down on our hands and knees and continued to keep a sharp eye on the track, and so shadowed it into the bush. Burke were in advance. Unfortunately the animal had stopped the rest, therefore Burke, having his head down, intent upon the track, butted up against the elephant's hind legs before he were aware of his vicinity. Burke instantly rose to his feet, seized the tail, exclaimed joyfully, I claim the... but got no further, for a single blow of the huge trunk laid the brave fellow's fragments low in death. I fled rearward, and the elephant turned and shadowed me at the edge of the wood, making tremendous speed, and I should never have been lost, but the remains of the funeral providentially intervened again and diverted his attention. I had just learned that nothing of that funeral is now left. It is no loss, for there is an abundance of material for another. Meantime, the elephant has disappeared again. Mulrooney, detective. We had no news except from the diligent and confident detectives scattered about New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware and Virginia, who were all following fresh and encouraging clues, until shortly after 2 p.m. when a telegram came. Baxter, Centre, 2:15. Elephant been plastered over with circus bills and broke up a revival, striking down and damaging many who were on the point of entering upon a better life. Citizens penned him up and established a guard. When Detective Brown and I arrived some time after, we entered the enclosure and proceeded to identify the elephant by photograph and description. All marks tallied exactly except one, which we could not see, the boil scar under armpit. Make sure Brown crept under to look and were immediately brained, his head crushed and destroyed, though nothing issued from debris. All fled, so did the elephant, striking right and left with much effect. Has escaped, but left bold blood track from cannon wounds. Rediscovery certain, he broke southward through a dense forest. Brent, detective. This was the last telegram. At nightfall, a fog shut down which was so dense that objects but 3 feet away could not be discerned. This lasted all night. The ferry boats and even the omnibuses had to stop running. Next morning, the papers were full of detective theories as before. They had all our tragic facts in detail, and also a great many more which they had received from their telegraphic correspondents. Column after column were occupied, a third of its way down, with glaring headlines which made my heart sick to read. Their general tone were like this: "The white elephant at large, he moves upon his fatal march. Whole villages deserted by their fright-stricken occupants. Pale terror goes before him, death and devastation follows after. After these, the detectives' barns destroyed, factories gutted, harvests devoured, public assemblages dispersed, accompanied by scenes of carnage impossible to describe. Theories of 34 of the most distinguished detectives on the force. Theory of Chief Blunt." "Yeah," said Inspector Blunt, almost betraying into excitement. "This is magnificent. This is the greatest windfall of any detective organisation ever had. The fame of it will travel to the ends of the earth and endure for the end of time, and my name with it." There were no joy for me. I felt as if I committed all these red crimes, and the elephant were only my irresponsible agent. Now the list had grown. In one place he had interfered with an election and killed 5 repeaters. He had followed this act with the destruction of 2 poor fellows named O'Donoghue and McFlanagan, who had found a refuge in the home of the oppressed of all lands only the day before, and were in the act of exercising for the first time the noble right of the American citizens at the polls when stricken down by the relentless hand of the scourge of Siam. In another, he had found the crazy sensation preacher preparing his next season's heroic attacks on the dance, the theatre, and other things which can't strike back, and had stepped on him. And in still another place, he had killed a lightning rod agent. And so the list... Is that a reference to Melville? And so the list went on, growing redder and redder, and more heartbreaking. 60 persons had been killed and 240 wounded. All the accounts bore the just testimony of the activity and devotion of the detectives, and all closed with the remark that 300,000 citizens and 4 detectives saw the dread creature, and 2 of the latter he destroyed. I dreaded to hear the telegraphic instrument begin to click again. By and by the messages began to pour in, but I was rapidly disappointed in their nature. It was soon apparent that all trace of the elephant were lost. The fog had enabled him to search out a good hiding place unobserved. Telegrams from most absurdly distant points reported that a dim, vast mass had been glimpsed there through the fog at such hour, and were undoubtedly the elephant. This dim, vast mass had been glimpsed in New York, in New Jersey, in Pennsylvania, interior New York, in Brooklyn, and even in the city of New York itself. But in all cases, the dim, vast mass had vanished quietly, or quickly, and left no trace. Every detective with a large force scattered over this huge extent of country sent his hourly report, and each and every one of them had a clue, and was shadowing something that was hot upon the heels of it. But the day passed without other results. Next day the same, and next day just the same. The newspaper reports began to grow monotonous with the facts that amounted to nothing, clues which led to nothing, and the theories which had nearly exhausted the elements which surprise and delight and dazzle. By advice of the inspector, I doubled the reward. 4 more days followed. Then came a bitter blow to the poor hard-working detective. The journalists declined to print their theories and coldly said, "Give us a rest." 2 weeks after the elephant's disappearance, I raised the reward to $75,000 by the inspector's advice. It was a great sum, but I felt I would rather sacrifice my old private fortune than lose my credit with my government. Now that the detectives were in adversity, the newspaper turned upon them and began to fling the most stinging sarcasms at them. They gave the minstrels an idea, and they dressed themselves as detectives and hunted the elephant on the stage the most extravagant way. The caricaturists made pictures of detectives scanning the country with spy glasses, while the elephant at their back stole apples out of their pockets. They made all sorts of ridiculous pictures of the detective badge. You've seen that badge printed in gold on the back of detective novels, no doubt. It is a wide staring eye with the legend, "We never sleep." When detectives called for a drink, the would-be facetious barkeeper resurrected an obsolete form of expression and said, "Will you have an eye-opener?" All the air was thick with sarcasms. There was one man who moved, calm, untouched, unaffected throughout it all. It was from that heart of oak, the chief inspector. His brave eye never drooped, his serene confidence never wavered. He always said, "Let them rail on. He laughs best who laughs last." My admiration for the man grew into a species of worship. I were at his side always. His offices had become an unpleasant place to me, and now became daily more and more so. If he could endure it, I meant to do so also, at least as long as I could. So I come regularly and stayed, the only outsider who seemed to be capable of it. Everybody wondered how I could, and often it seemed to me that I must desert. But at such times I looked into that calm and apparently unconscious face and held my ground. About 3 weeks after the elephant's disappearance, I was about to say one morning that I should have to strike my colours and retire, when the great detective arrested my thoughts by proposing one more superb and masterly move. This was to compromise with the robbers. The fertility of this man's invention exceeded anything I had ever seen, and I had a wide intercourse with the world's finest minds. He said he was confident he could compromise for $100,000 and recover the elephant. I said I believe I could scrape that amount together. But what would become of the poor detectives who worked so faithfully? He said, in compromises, they always get half. This removed my only objection, so the inspector wrote 2 notes in this form. Dear Madam, your husband can make a large sum of money and be entirely protected from the law by making an immediate appointment with me, Chief Blunt. He sent one of these by his confidential messenger to the reputed wife of Brick Duffy, and the other the reputed wife of Red McFadden. Within the hour, these 2 offensive answers came in. You old fool, Brick McDuffie been dead 2 years, Bridget Mahoney. Chief Bat, Red McFadden is hung and in having 18 months. Any ass but a detective knows this, Mary O'Houlihan. I had long suspected these facts, said the inspector. His testimony proves the unerring accuracy of my instinct. A moment one resource failed him, he was already with another, and he immediately wrote an advertisement for the morning papers, and I kept a copy of it. A-XWBLV.242N.TJND-FZ328WMLG.OZPO.OCPO.OGW.mum. So he's writing high security passwords. He said that if the thief were alive, this would bring him to the usual rendezvous. It's further explained that the usual rendezvous were a place where all business affairs between detectives and criminals were conducted. The meeting would take place at 12 the next night. We could do nothing till then, and I lost no time in getting out of the office, and were grateful indeed for the privilege. At 11 the next night, I brought $100,000 in banknotes and put them into the chief's hands. And shortly afterward he took his leave, with a brave old undimmed confidence in his eyes. An almost intolerable hour dragged to a close, then I heard his welcome tread and rose gasping and tottered to meet him. How his fine eyes flamed with triumph. He said, We've compromised. The jokers will sing a different tune tomorrow. Follow me. He lit a lighted candle and strode down into the vast vaulted basement where 60 detectives always slept, and where a score were now playing cards to while the time. I followed close after him. He walked swiftly down to the dim, remote end of the place, and just as I succumbed to the pangs of suffocation and was swooning away, he stumbled and fell over the outlying members of a mighty object, and I heard him exclaim as he went down, "Our noble profession is vindicated. Here is your elephant." I carried the office and restored with carbolic acid. The old detective force swarmed in, and such another session of triumphant rejoicing ensued as I had never witnessed before. The reporters were called, baskets of champagne were opened, toasts were drunk, the handshakings and congratulations were continuous and enthusiastic. Naturally, the chief was the hero of the hour, and his happiness was so complete that he had been so patiently and worthily and bravely won that it made me happy to see it. Though I stood there in an homeless beggar, my priceless charge dead, and my poor position in my country's service lost to me, through what would always seem my fatally careless execution of a great trust. Many an eloquent eye testified to its deep admiration for the chief, and many a detective's voice might look at him, he's just the king of the profession. I only gave him a clue, that's all he wants, and there ain't anything he can't find. The dividing of the $50,000 made a great pleasure, and when it was finished, the chief made a little speech where he put his share in his pocket, in which he said, "Enjoy it, boys, for you've earned it, and more than that, you've earned it for the detective profession undying fame." A telegram arrived which read, "Monroe Mike, 10 p.m. First time I've struck a telegraph office in over 3 weeks. So follow these footprints, horseback through the woods, 1,000 miles to here, and they get stronger and bigger and fresher every day. Don't worry, inside another week I'll have the elephant. This is dead sure. Darley, detective." The chief ordered 3 cheers for Darley, one of the finest minds in the force, and commanded that he be telegraphed to come home and receive his share of the reward. So ended that marvellous episode with the stolen elephant. The newspapers were pleased and were pleasant with praises once more the next day, with one contemptible exception. This sheet said, "Great is the detective. He may be a little slow in finding a little thing like a mislaid elephant. He may hunt him all day and sleep with his rotten carcass all night for 3 weeks, but he will find him at last. You can get the man who mislaid him to show him the place. Poor Hassan, who will lost to me forever. Poor Hassan will lost to me forever. The cannon shots had wounded him fatally. He had crept to that unfriendly place in the fog, and there, surrounded by his enemies and in constant danger of detection, he had wasted away with hunger and suffering till death gave him peace. The compromise cost me $100,000. My detective expenses were $42,000 more. I never applied for a place again under my government. I am a ruined man and a wanderer in the earth. My admiration for that man, whom I believe to be the greatest detective the world has ever produced, remains undimmed to this day, and will so remain until the end. And that's the end of The Stolen White Elephant. That were alright. I'm not really sure what to say about it. Like, it's a pretty clear parody of the detective novel, with the increasingly absurd things, and there's some fun in the back and forth a bit, like all the increasingly absurd sightings and telegrams, the clues, and the certainty of finding him, and the travelling 1,000 miles bit. But it's not actually that great. I think probably the problem is that this is a bit that has been done to death in more modern times. Whereas Twain is sort of, I mean, he's probably inventing the style pretty much here, given the time he's writing in. And it's not bad. Like, he's got his funny moments, the absurdity of the increasingly elaborate that's what's the word? Assumptions and discoveries of the detective, and the admiration shown for this bumbling idiot. But it does fall a bit flat, unfortunately. Still, fun enough. Didn't mind it. I'd say it were a good one, by Twain standards. But not his best work. Anyhow, I don't really think I've got much more to say on this. Yeah. I think tomorrow I'm gonna go through the thing again, see if I can't turf up one last Fitzgerald, which we'll do tomorrow if I can get it, and if we can't, probably a bit more Twain or something to that effect. Obviously on Friday is the Londonathon, which I'm still hopeful we can get up a little bit higher. At this point we're at 5 stories and counting, but I'd love to be doing at least the full 10, if not some of the Seawolf. But who can say? 5 will still be decent. But yeah, I think, I'm trying to think what else I can say really, but that's about the long and short of it. I'm sort of disappointed I chose to end on this really. I was thinking that it would be, the Fitzgerald would be depressing, which they generally are, and then the Twain would be a bit of a lightness, but it's actually quite a dour Twain all told. And the last Fitzgerald I quite enjoyed the ending of, so maybe not the best thing. That's the problem with reading these, though. I'm reading them at the same time you're hearing them, so they're coming up together. Still, alright, all told, I think. Didn't mind it, not a bad day. Yeah, again, thank you again to anyone who did turn up to this, and of course to anyone who is watching this in the future. I do appreciate you joining me for these, and until next time, a ta-ra!